Hello, it's May 25th, 2022. We're here today with Dr. Brent Townshend, who is a remarkable individual who's done a lot of very interesting things touching upon areas related to computing and information technology, as well as molecular biology and photography and music and all sorts of amazing things. So, Dr. Townshend, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Now, we'd like to start with you as a youngster and start the story early on in your life and just sort of step through how things were for you as a youngster, what your parents did, what your early interests or hobbies were, and how, how did you enjoy school, those kind of things.
Sure, yeah. Go back a long way there. Yeah, so I was brought up in Toronto, born in Toronto, Canada, and I lived in the suburbs of northwest Toronto, and my parents. My father was a bricklayer, chimney builder, specifically. So he had a little small company, himself and a helper, basically, and they would go around and repair people's chimneys because up in Canada there's a lot of need for those chimneys, and they fall apart pretty quickly. And actually, even before that, he was doing a lot of different odd jobs. He was doing like bricklaying and doing oil delivery, fuel oil delivery, driving a fuel oil truck and everything. I remember some nights he would be on the night shift, and some nights I would go with him and go along to the drives. And they had these trucks that had this big cab, so there'd be like a bed in the back. So then I'd end up falling asleep after by midnight or something, and then wake up in the morning and get home at 6 a.m. or something.
Oh my goodness! What is the where did your dad and your mom come from? What is their origin?
So they're
originally?
both were born in Toronto. So my mother's father immigrated from England in like 1910 or something like that. So he was born in 1904, I think. And so he came over with his family. On my father's side, it was maybe another generation. Yeah, my great-grandfather emigrated maybe in the late 19th century also from England. So they're both. Yeah, I did a little bit of family tree lookup. I went back to the town that on my father's side that they were originally from and everything, and there was still some other Townsends that were in that small town and everything. And
what town was that?
it's called Wood Bastwick in Norfolk.
Oh, interesting.
England.
Wow.
Because my aunt had started doing these family tree things, so it got me sort of interested. So I went up to investigate that a little bit. So
tell us about you're staying up all night in your dad's fuel oil truck, and what kind of things did you learn from that besides just perseverance?
Perseverance. It was just something different from the day. It was not that frequent. I mean, maybe I did it maybe a dozen times total or something.
Would this be in the winter mainly?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Because obviously for fuel oil delivery, that's the big thing. And they have these big refinery plants, so you get in the truck and drive into the refinery thing, refuel everything up like there, which is really cool for a little kid to see all the lights and the pipes and the connections and everything. And so that was the most fun part. And then to get out and start delivering fuel oil, and then it's the time to fall asleep and wake up later.
How was school for you? Did you enjoy school?
Yeah, that was interesting. I did enjoy school, but I didn't go very much.
Maybe that's why you enjoyed it.
Well, actually, I think it is. I think in many ways that's actually accurate. So, for a long time I was an only child. My sister was born when I was 10. And my mother, she wasn't working she was working when I was very young, but then she stopped working and was just at home. And so she liked having me around. So often in the morning, I'd wake up and she'd say, "Oh, you sure you want to go to school today? we could go to the mall or something, or we could go out and do something." "Oh, okay." So I would end up not going to school maybe 2 or 3 days a week. I would just go sporadic, well, maybe more than that. 3 or 4 days a week I would go to school, and the other days I would just do other things. And that was carried on through elementary school and part of junior high school. But then I think a lot of, and why I said that was sort of maybe accurate about being why you like school is by the time I was getting to high school, a lot of the kids were sort of fatigued of school. They weren't really that interested. They weren't, almost like burnout even. Whereas I hadn't been going that much, so it was all it was sort of like interesting. I was, I like this stuff, and so I stopped. So on my own motivation, I really wanted to go to school much more and everything and do stuff. So by the time
high school.
For high school, by the time I got to high school, then I was really engaged and really interested in everything. So
right. When did your interest in science and things technical begin?
During high school, I think primarily. There was a really nice program at the high school that I went to that was a collaboration between the Ontario Science Centre and different high schools. And so what it was is once a week there would be, some of the kids would be, go to the Science Centre and they would take these classes at the Science Centre from the different staff at the Science Centre. So it was a really nice outreach program from the Science Centre. That's, like the Science and Technology Museum of Toronto or of Ontario. And then it was a great motivator for, having fun and doing things, So I remember they had this old teletype machine. There were one session showing us how, here's how you program this. Here's the tape, paper tape that you can punch out and make things and do things like that. There was also a lot of, some bio things. There was, all different domains of science. So it was quite interesting to do that and to have that ability.
The Ontario Science Centre, which I hung out a lot into, was actually established a world model for science centers. It was considered almost the best of its kind.
Right.
When
Yeah.
it came up.
It was quite good. It was quite
very lucky to be there in Toronto and have advantage to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah. And that was I realized after that was not like what most people got to do. It was an opportunity that came up randomly. And
it's so interesting to hear you say that one of the big sparks for your interest, being a museum person, I can't help noting that it was essentially a museum or a science center that kind of stimulated your, an informal learning environment, as we call them.
Exactly.
That really gets people going and jazzed up. So that's great. Well, anyway, tell us about high school. Were you in any clubs or any special hobbies or projects?
I did a lot of reading, so I was really a lot of, really into science fiction and so I was reading spending a lot of time sort of. I think I'm primarily an introvert, so now that I can categorize people or categorize myself at least, based on what gives you energy and what doesn't. I feel that when I'm on my own and just studying things, that's when I gain energy and everything. But the other than that, there was like, I don't really remember what clubs there was. I wasn't really into sports. I was not doing much athletics, and the school was a pretty academic school, so it wasn't.
What
really,
school was that?
William Lyon Mackenzie.
Oh yeah.
High school. So.
Okay. Yeah. Favorite subjects? I'm guessing physics, chemistry.
Chemistry. We had a really interesting chemistry professor. What was his name now? I can't remember. Oh, Peddle, Dr. Peddle. So he was actually a PhD, which is unusual, I think, for have a chemistry teacher in high school that was a PhD, who had worked in industry and just was sort of like, I don't want to be in this rat race and teach high school. But he was very, opinionated and sarcastic but very good and a very good teacher.
Yes.
And the same on the math side, like calculus teacher was a very, brilliant teacher and everything. So I think those are the ones that stood out to me. French classes I took all the time and never learned any French until much later when I met my wife. So that didn't stick very well at least in the first round. Yeah.
Well, now you mentioned science fiction, so can you name a couple of authors that you particularly?
Well, Asimov at the time was just like an amazing thing, and still is. That's it. And Bradbury. These are the classics and everything of all the science fiction literature was really the things that I was going for and everything.
And Asimov had this wonderful, so many of his 600 books were about teaching people science or the history of science and stuff like. It was a great, apart from his sci-fi stories like the robotics and all that, he was actually contributed to the public understanding of science in a huge way, and that I think is very underrated.
Sure, it makes it much more accessible and much more, it gives you the science without having to, feel like you're reading a textbook. But and it makes it really interesting. His writing is amazing.
So through high school, did you have dreams of university, or what was your horizon
Not
like?
really. You know, my family, so all of my ancestors, nobody had gone to college, and including actually even at my generation. So I had, my father had had 12 siblings, so it was a large family. I had 27 first cousins. But none. I was the only one, I believe, that went to college of all that entire group. So it was not a sort of a standard thing to do. And I think part of it came from that high school, because the high school, a neighbor of mine who was like a year older had gone there, and he told me, and we hung out a lot, and he told me, oh, you should transfer and go to this high school, because it wasn't in our neighborhood. It was in an adjacent area. And it was, I think it was his push to me that, you know, okay, well, I'll go there. I mean, we had to take the bus every day to go across, you know, it wasn't that far, you know, like 5 miles away or something, but it's not like, you know, going to the other end of the city. But that high school was, you know, 90%, you know, college driven going into. It was very focused, you know, and making, you know, and obviously the quality of the teachers and the.
So when did things click for you? I guess at the time Ontario had grade 13. It had
Correct. Yep.
5 years of high school.
Yes.
And at what point did you sort of think, maybe university would be
I
kind
think
of
it
fun?
was. Well, I mean, so you're right. It has great, or did, I don't think it still does anymore. And it was pretty much, if you weren't going to go to college, you finished at grade 12, and people that were going to go to college would do grade 13. So it was sort of by grade 11, grade 12, you sort of had to make a decision if you're going to follow the track or whatever. If I recall correctly, you know, it's hard, you know, but I've talked to so many other students and other people. Now, sometimes it's hard to remember what actually happened to me versus happened to other people. But definitely by the time it was grade 11, grade 12, I was pretty interested in engineering, specifically science in general and everything, science, math. It was clearly that was what was motivating me. And you know, so I was pretty set on going to college. It was kind of much different, I think, than the college application process that goes on in the U.S., or especially that goes now. It's not a matter of like doing all these college apps and doing everything. It was just a matter of saying, oh, okay, I guess I'll go to college. So you fill out the one-page form and send it away. And obviously you're going to University of Toronto because that's the closest university. So it's like, it's almost default. And both from the point of view of admissions, it's just like, oh, did you have these grades in these classes? Okay, then you're in. No essays, nothing like that. So a much simpler process, and also much cheaper, like $600 a year, I think it was, or $650 a year for.
Yeah, you could work during the summer and pay your tuition
Easily, yeah.
You could quite,
Yeah.
in those days. Yeah. So tell us, let's see, when you mentioned you had an interest in engineering, was it electrical at that point or some other kind of engineering?
Well, interesting. Yeah, I wasn't really sure. I mean, I really liked pure science, physics and math and chemistry. But I also saw that, you know, engineering seemed like the practical application of it. I was very interested in the theory and everything, but not without actual application. So I wanted to make sure that I was doing something that, you know, I can turn it around and make something with it. So engineering was clearly the draw there for doing that. But I wasn't really sure what kind of engineering. You know, the nice thing was that University of Toronto had a program called engineering physics, engineering science actually they called it at the time, but it's really a broad engineering program that you're covering everything. You do 2 years of the engineering science general curriculum that everybody's in, and then in the last 2 years you specialize in one particular domain. So not only is that a little bit broader than doing a specific electrical or chemical or whatever engineering, but also it delays the decision point too. So basically I signed up for engineering science, got into engineering science and was doing that, and then could defer any further decision. The decision I made later was to do nuclear power, So actually, I started off in the third year and working in the nuclear power subdomain of the engineering science program, and working on. They have a little small reactor in the basement there. I started to work on.
What building was that at U of T?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
hard
maybe
to
that's
know.
not
Yeah.
a fair question. That's
Yeah.
asking quite a lot. But were you thinking of a career in
That's
that?
what I was thinking. Yeah,
like
because
Chalk River or
yeah,
something like
because
that?
at the time, the Canadian programs for nuclear power were really going very well. The CANDU reactor, which was originated in Canada, obviously, was getting worldwide.
Yeah, we sold one to
acclaim.
India, I remember.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there was a lot of interest there, and it seemed like a great career, and it was combining physics and math and science, and in many ways it seemed like, well, this would be perfect. Though once I was in that area, probably I don't remember exactly when, but sometime during the third year and before the beginning of the fourth year, I got more interested in the computational side and electrical engineering side. So then by the time I was in the fourth year, I'd switched over to the electrical engineering track, and stayed in that sort of domain for a while.
Yeah. Well, I remember engineering science was, engineering was considered a very, I have a couple of friends who've done an EE and an MD, and they said they're basically equivalent in difficulty, and then, but the engineering science people were like a whole other level beyond. So kudos for surviving that and flourishing.
Yeah.
I'm sure
It was exactly a survival thing, because the admissions wasn't actually not that hard. So they would admit.
But it was a very challenging program.
Yeah, they would admit at that time they were admitting 180 students per year, and they would fail out 120 of them by the second year.
Oh my.
So it was. Unfortunately, there was a track. You just go into one of the other engineering things directly, but it was really the idea was let everybody in and see who survives.
Yeah. And their emphasis is on sort of theory. Would that be fair enough?
Yes,
to
there's
say?
a lot of classes in like quantum mechanics and physics and chemistry and then math. Obviously, a lot of math.
And a lot of times in engineering, there's a senior project. Did you have one? At the
Yeah,
time?
actually, that's interesting. I'd forgotten all about that, and just like this week when I was just looking through, as you suggested, look at some old papers and see what jogs your memory. I found my bachelor's thesis, and I'd forgotten all about this, but it was actually on doing what I was calling at the time, and what was called a video text, which was basically building I built a graphics terminal that would allow you to use it at home to receive data and get video text, basically navigatable information, like the news, and then click on the weather and do that kind of thing. Right. So it was really effectively an HTML browser before HTML existed, but not just, it was both the software side and also the hardware side. So I actually built all the circuit boards and built the video drivers.
Now, was this an encoder? Is that fair to
it was, I guess, more like a decoder. So it was the client end. So the end that would go in somebody's home. So there was already a commercial video text service that was being piloted by Bell Canada to do this.
What's that? Teledon.
Teledon, exactly.
Yeah. And they
Teledon.
used the NAPLIPS protocol?
Yes, exactly. NAPLIPS. Yeah, that's right. I hadn't thought of that word in a long time. So the Bell Canada had this Teledon project, which was using this semi-standardized protocol for that. And so what I did is I built a home terminal that would interface with that same network and everything.
Yeah, Teledon, and the various the British and the Germans and the French, and I guess that took off in France maybe a little better than.
Yeah, it didn't really take
with
off.
the Minitel. Well, although was that really a teletext system? I'm not sure. I guess it's more. It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
At the time, they were calling it a video text, but it wasn't really. It was no video involved, so it was more like still imagery and everything. That was.
But you're right. There's a great quote by William Gibson, fellow Canadian, that I like to use. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
Where there's you see these glimpses of the future, like the Teledon and it's just it's just not quite
Didn't
ready.
quite catch on.
We're gonna have to wait, or maybe it'll just peter out.
Right. I mean, because even there was things like in the late '90s, there was widespread use of these ricochet modems and everything. So you basically go anywhere and have internet connect. Well, effective, not really internet connection, but data connections to the internet. And then it all went away, and it was another 10 years before there was actually the widespread, for 3G.
I remember Stanford had little ricochet units all over campus. Yeah, for a while there. Yeah. So you've got your Bachelor of Applied Science, and what's your next step? Did you do more schooling, or did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Went straight there. All through while I was at University of Toronto, I was working summers and part times. I was working for my dad actually. So I mentioned before that he was doing this chimney building. So after the oil delivery and working for other people, he started his own small business and was doing repairing chimneys and everything. And it turned out he was from a long line of chimney builders. His father was doing that. His grandfather was doing that. His great-grandfather was doing that in England. So they were all in that line. And a lot of his brothers had gone into the same business as well, since they all, it's what they all knew. So for a long time, I was sort of in the tract of just carrying on the family business and everything. And then by the time I was starting to go to college, it was getting more dubious that I was actually going to follow that route.
Now, what does that mean? You were actually in the summers building chimneys?
Building chimneys, carrying bricks, mixing mortar, doing bricklaying and everything. So it was a more manual experience than thing, which was fun too. Actually, I really enjoyed doing that.
Kind of motivates you to stay in school, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too.
Like, wow, this is
it's
hard
actual.
work.
Yeah. My dad would always tell me, he said, practically you want to be able to make as much money in life as a tradesman makes, but not get dirty. So if you can do that, then you're successful. If you can,
So I think the next step was Stanford. Is that correct?
Yes. So then I applied to Stanford. I applied a few places. I think I applied to MIT, Caltech, and Stanford. Didn't get into MIT. I got into Caltech and Stanford. But I'd never seen any of these places, because you have to also understand at that time, when you're doing a college search of something, first of all, there's no internet, so you're not getting much information. You get these books and everything about things, so it's a very limited amount of information. And I wasn't flying around anywhere. I'd never. I'd done one.
You were 22 years old?
I'd gone on one trip before outside of Ontario,
Oh, wow.
it was not.
Where was that to?
That was my uncle was from Ireland. So when I was like 10, he took me to Ireland and spent a month there. But that was the only trip I had taken outside. So in doing the college application process, it's not a matter of doing the visits or anything else. It was like, okay, here's 2 pages about this one and this one and this one. These seem like the good science schools, so I'll apply there. So I got into Stanford, and then before starting, drove out there. And that was the first time when I drove out. That was the first time I saw it.
And what were your first impressions?
And the first impression was, this is not at all what I expected. I expected high tech. I expected modern sort of, the kind of futuristic sort of environment. And I get there and it's all, the low Spanish architecture and everything with tile roofs and, and stone. So it's like, this does not look at all like
what was your first
anticipation of
your first drive down Palm Drive?
It was just like this is great. And
it's
like
pretty incredible.
It was beautiful, but it's like also not at all like, where is all the high tech? Is it hiding it somewhere? Yeah. Because both California from the point of view of buildings being lower versus Toronto, where you sort of associate tall buildings with technology, and even at the university campus is all tall buildings, and so it's
and there's no basements here either.
There's no basement. Yeah, exactly.
So garages is where everything has to be invented, right?
So
anyway,
so it was a very different impression right from the beginning. But the classes were great. I applied for masters. At that time, the way Stanford worked is you didn't, at least in electrical engineering, you didn't apply for a PhD directly. You applied for masters. And also, I don't recall, but I think I was probably only planning on doing a master's at the time. But then during the master's year, you can do qualifying exams, and whoever passes the qualifying exam gets admitted to the PhD program as well. And it's only 1 year master's. It took a lot of I didn't have any financial aid, so it took a lot of saving. It took all the summer from before summers before of saving up. When I came to Stanford, you had sort of a cashier there to pay for the first tuition. So I had enough money for 1 quarter. So I paid for the first quarter, and the plan was, I'd read about things you can get, research assistantships from profs and everything from labs. So then it was a scramble from that first September until December to find a lab to do to get funded for the rest of the program and everything.
That is so difficult when you're busy just trying to keep your grades up to be worried about funding.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's.
So I actually now that I think about it, I only had to pay partial because I had a Canadian government national
little subsidy.
NSERC, National Science of Engineering Research Council. So that partially funded, but it was sort of the funding for that was based on the Canadian model, which is we're going to give you enough money to pay for your graduate school, which is like 1/5 of the cost of Stanford graduate school. So there was a big gap between the two, but there was funding there from that.
What was your master's project and paper?
There was no actually Stanford. I'm not sure if it still is, but it was coursework only. There was no thesis for the master's.
Now, did the coursework lay the ground for the audio processing, the speech, the hearing work that you did later?
Well,
or is that really the
no,
PhD?
actually it changed because I was doing now at this point. I'd built the video text thing, and I was really interested in sort of building circuits and building things. So I ended up very focused on VLSI in chip design when I started at Stanford. And that's actually where I got the research assistantship with John Hennessy with his MIPS project at the time.
Oh, okay. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so that was just the beginning of when they were doing reduced instruction set computing. So John had built quite a formidable group at Stanford to do the, and he was still he was just a prof,
right. But not president yet.
Not president, and hadn't started MIPS and hadn't done. So it was all as a faculty. He was developing the reduced instruction set computing, and so I went with his group and everything, and started working on logic arrays and doing optimization of logic arrays with him. So that got me through until I started the PhD, and I started my PhD with working in his lab. But it was also interesting because I think maybe it was probably my mistake is that I ended up picking a project with him with this logic array optimization, which was very focused. It was sort of a one-person project of a subset of a much bigger sort of thing, but I was really working on that small thing. So I really felt that I was working isolated from. It was not a collaborative. It didn't feel like a collaborative project because I wasn't touching all the other pieces of things. I was just focused on this, and so it was not. So I could work at home. It was great. I could do a lot of stuff there, but I wasn't really feeling part of a bigger team.
Yeah. So you had like you felt a need to connect with people better, more.
Yeah, especially when you're building. A lot of times you're building something, it's great to bounce ideas of other people to get their feedback on them, and also to feel like you're delivering something to them that they appreciate too. So, and I think that the project, although it was an interesting project, because it was also very apropos because it was needed for doing one element of the whole chip design part of thing. It wasn't really something that I was really happy with.
Right, it was part of the tool chain, right?
Part of the tool chain, yeah.
Yeah, for like you say, this overall VLSI design process.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is how do you make these particular subsets smaller, and how do you optimize the layout of those things, and how do you optimize the structure?
Was John Massey involved? Do you know him?
The name sounds really familiar.
Oh, okay. He was at MIPS too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And SGI.
Yeah. So I switched anyways. I switched research projects partway through to another one that was being run by Robert White, and so that was the cochlear implant project. So this was my first taste of something on the biomedical side. I was really involved in the signal processing. So The project, just back up, the project was really to create cochlear implants for profoundly deaf patients. And Stanford had, pioneered that technology in the late 60s or early 70s. They had done the first cochlear implant, just a single electrode in a patient that was profoundly deaf to give them back some sense of sound. At that time, it was really focused on just environmental sound. So if you're stepping out off the curb and a car honks, you know something's happening or something like that. So
helps safety.
Helps safety, and it also helps. Even if you're a good lip reader, if somebody's here and talking, you don't know that they're there and talking, so you have to look. So there's a lot of environmental cues that are missing if you're profoundly deaf that even a very crude implant can help with. So the project that I joined then was expanding that further to create cochlear implants that would help actually with speech comprehension and help more. We'll also give the environmental aspect, but also try and either improve lip reading ability or actually allow people to speak without any lip reading or hear without lip reading. So, and the nice thing about that project, and that what really drew me to it, it was a team, right? So it built a team of people. There was like a psychophysics person from the psychology department. There was the people that were working on the electrodes, actually building platinum or whatever it was. I'm not sure what material it was now, but some biocompatible things. There was the medical team that was actually doing surgical implants and everything that was putting these in, and then there was the computational side, which is really what I was focused on. Is okay. Now that you have electrodes, what patterns of stimulation do you apply to the electrodes to give sound, and how is that map to what people perceive?
Can you explain? I noticed in your CV the word percept, because I think it's relevant to this discussion.
So a lot of it, at one end, you could say, well, this is just it's a computational problem. How do we get from here to there? The problem is the only way we have of measuring what comes out the other end is what somebody reports. Yeah. Okay, so the percept or the perception of the sound. So how do you take this, very qualitative comments and everything and convert them into some numerical model, which you can say, okay, now we have to apply this particular pattern to give this particular sound. There's a big gap there, and that's why psychophysics and psychoacoustics is really important. It's to say, what is the percept that we're providing there? So we did a lot of work in designing experiments that would sort of quantify those things. For example, figuring out just noticeable differences. I give two different sounds, and the person is supposed to decide, by pushing a button, if they're the same sounds or different. And then you can sometimes give them exactly the same thing. You can sometimes give them different things. You can change them slightly and change them in different ways. You could change the amplitude. You could change the frequency of this. You could change the pattern that you're doing in time. So and then by collecting a lot of that data, sitting with the things and running these experiments over and over again, you start to build a model of what are the factors that are changing, how sensitive is the hearing to that, the percept to that, and so on like that.
So the man in the loop, so to speak, is critical.
Absolutely.
To the whole
so when I was doing
process.
I'm sorry, the person that we have that had, so we had three that were regular patients. So they were three people that had the same implant in them, and one day a week, each Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, one of them would be in for like 4 or 5 hours into our lab, and then we would sit down and we'd be designing experiments on running all these things on a PDP-11 in the basement with gigantic disk drives. Appreciate that from the Computer History Museum. All the hardware at the time was not not as compact as it is now. Yeah. I think we had washing machine disk drives was 20 megabytes of storage or something. But anyway, the setup was have these computer things that are generating patterns and having the person push buttons or report things that was then all stored away, and then we could analyze that and figure out the things.
Were these, I don't know, I don't want to get too far afield, but were these people deaf from birth?
I think of that group, there was one that was deaf from birth, but the other two were not. The problem with people that are deaf from birth is that they don't have any reference frame to explain what they're hearing. If somebody was recently deaf, and you give them this, they can say, oh, well, that's a very high-pitched sound, that's a very low-pitched sound, that's a rough sound or something. Whereas somebody that's deaf from birth has no way of categorizing those things.
You know, I have this image of, I don't think this is quite the way it worked because you guys were, but I think of like sliders that you had able to adjust. And the ultimate would be to have the actual deaf person adjust the sliders themselves until they heard something.
Something, yes.
That made sense.
You know.
But maybe the technology didn't support it at the time.
Well, it's not so much technology. I mean, you're talking about something. The individual patterns and everything are only giving one tiny element of a piece of sound. It's not like you're getting something that's speech or
I'm
music.
Oversimplifying.
Yeah. So all you're doing is getting, okay, if I said them like this, I hear something goes ee or something, or I hear something that does that. But it's really, you have to do a lot of those experiments to figure out how to build up that vocabulary of tiny elements of sound before you can then start putting them together. And I think that's beyond the capability of somebody to actually mix together with slide
Yeah,
control.
and so were they, how complex were the waveforms you were presenting them with?
Oh, they were pretty complex.
Were they actual words or just like frequencies, tones?
They were just tones, effectively. Patterns,
okay.
really, I would say, that would give different sounds. I mean, we would still map. I mean, after we would do this, we would, postulate a program that would a mapping that would take audio and convert it into something similar to what they're hearing. So then, we were doing that iteratively, independently of the sort of psychoacoustic side. So you take the psychoacoustic data and you say, okay, given all that, we should map these frequencies to these particular things. And then we would code that and give it to them, and they would then use that like that. And they would try it out, and they would report back, okay, well, that just sounded really noisy. It sounded really terrible. And or sometimes it was like, oh, that was, like I could read lips better there with that, or I could do something. We had like a star, I remember there were three patients we had. There was the star patient, Linda, who was an amazing lip reader. She was like, she worked at, I think she might have worked at Intel as an administrative position and everything. And there was people that didn't know that she was deaf because she could just, read lips perfectly. And on all the experiments, she was getting really good information from it. This was how we wanted the thing to work, because she could, we could give patterns and she could distinguish them super well. She could do everything, and in testing, it would benefit her the most. She could, it would, even though she was already really good, you could create you could create like obscuring the person that's being lip reading, or they could be turning, or they could have a big beard. And this would improve her ability significantly to have this on. Anecdotally, she reported she never used it. She said it's much too noisy at work and there's things like that. So it was just like, she said, I like it silent. I don't like all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Almost like the hearing aid problem
Yeah,
sometimes.
right.
It's like, I'm hearing too much.
On the other end, yeah, exactly, it's too much. On the other end, we had this this other patient, Ray, and he got, you can do all the experiments, he got zero benefit from it. He was not able to, it was not giving him anything. He loved it. He would have it on, he would be reporting anecdotally, this has changed his life, he's like so much happier with this, it's so much, and we could see from the experiments that it was doing.
The data wasn't.
It was like, no, it's not really helping you at all. But
sort of placebo effect. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. What? Tell us more about your role on that project. Like, you were on the DSP side?
Yeah, so I was working on the signal processing. I was doing designing psychoacoustic experiments in conjunction with the psychoacoustic. So I was spending a lot of time with the patients as well and running the experiments, or testing out the hypothesis and trying to do them. But then also on the signal processing side to take acoustic waveforms from a microphone and then convert them into patterns of electrodes. And my PhD thesis was based on the problem with the electrode is you're sticking them in the inner ear, the cochlea, which is this fluid-filled spiral chamber, and there's effectively around 30,000 neurons that are there, and they're spatially organized by pitch. So one end is very high pitch and one end is very low pitch. Ideally, you'd want to be able to turn on each neuron independently. but we're coming in with a very coarse set of electrodes, 8 electrodes. But even worse is that it's all fluid filled, so it's all conductive. So you stimulate the first electrode, and you're creating a pattern of current down the entire length.
Like a wavefront.
A wavefront of that.
Yeah.
So what I worked on is saying, okay, if we want to stimulate one area in the middle, yes, we turn on that electrode, but we also put negative on the pattern around it. So we basically beamform inside the cochlea to create a focus. But we had to do beamforming in that way without having any actual quantitative measurements inside. So it's all based on reports of what people are hearing. So you could, basically you could push and pull on two things and get it to the point where the person couldn't tell the difference of whether you turned it on or not. And then the trick was then to take that reports of this plus minus exactly here adds up to 0 and say, okay, that's how much these things are interacting with each other. So my PhD thesis was really on how to do that measurement of all of these different spreading and then deconvolve that so that you could get really sharp, narrow peaks of the stimulation.
Right. So yes, you were just telling us about your dissertation, and I wanted to ask the question. A lot of, typically from Stanford too, PhDs go and they start a company. Was that your
it wasn't
path,
really.
or what was your next step there?
Yeah, no, I don't know what was completely in my mind at the time, but I didn't really consider, I don't think at the time, starting a company. I was, pretty set on the research path. I was looking at possibility of faculty things, but primarily I was looking at industrial research. So, my post-PhD sort of job hunt really was SRI, Bell Labs in New Jersey, and IBM in upstate New York, and Bolt, Beranek, and Newman doing speech recognition research in Boston.
Great. Those are all leading centers of that, and so industrial research.
Industrial research.
Yeah.
So I interviewed at those places and talked to different people and everything, and I ended up choosing Bell Labs at that time.
They are, yes. I mean, of that list, I would say they're almost the best place for psychoacoustics and just understanding of, they've got a century-long tradition of
exactly
dealing with audio processing and
exactly
understanding speech and intelligibility and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, there was a really strong research team there. As you said, there was a lot of history in understanding hearing. There was some of the textbooks that we used in sort of understanding, perception of sound and everything were written by Bell Labs people.
Was Lichtleiter one of those guys that you?
I'm not sure now.
No, okay, yeah.
My name memory is not the greatest.
No, that's fine. I just thought you might know him.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, Bell Labs. That's a fantastic assignment. What was your? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it was really exciting. I mean, first it was a move to the New York area, New Jersey, New York, which was, I'd never lived there. I'd never really.
But being Canadian, you were used to the winters.
Yes, the winters were not an issue. Leaving California was more of an issue, but at the time it was like, this is, the next step, right? To try something else, go somewhere else.
Yes. And it's a real world center of that. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I also had met, who was currently my wife, so we met there at Stanford during the PhDs. She was doing her PhD in.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so she was doing. She was also Canadian from Montreal. So when she left Quebec, her father told her, "Don't come back with an American." Primarily because
that's a good Quebec attitude. I like it.
Yeah, people will lose their child to the
okay, that's
the other
why,
side.
Yeah.
Of course, he never said don't come back with an English Canadian, because that everyone understood was absolutely forbidden. That was much worse than an American.
It's already understood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's
whole
funny.
Tension between English and French Canada is right there at that border. But anyways, we met there at Stanford. She was doing her PhD in structural engineering for earthquake resistance. So she was basically working on developing methods and tools for designing earthquake resistant or earthquake handling buildings and everything.
Very good. The right part of the country to be
Yes.
studying that. Yeah. Right. I'm sorry. I remember a gig you had at Levelin in Montreal. Would she have been working
Yes,
there too?
so she had been working at
We
Levelin.
can come to that later,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I just thought structural engineering. Yeah, maybe there's a link there. Yeah.
Yes, yes, there is a link there. So she was there at Stanford. She started a year after me at Stanford. We met like second year there or something, and then we were dating then. And so when I left to go to New Jersey, she was finishing up her final year of the PhD, and then she eventually moved to New York as well too. Yeah.
Where did you guys live? Did you say New York?
Yeah, so the first year lived in New Jersey near Bell Labs in Murray Hill, New Jersey. Then after that, we moved to Manhattan and lived in the West Village.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
that must have been fun.
Yeah, no, it was definitely
Yeah.
a fun place and everything. And it
Yeah.
was,
And so, what kind of work did you do at Bell Labs? And
So I was doing-
was it applied or more theoretical, kind of?
yeah, it was kind of both.
Okay.
I was working on psychoacoustics again. So I was working on how people hear things, and primarily there's a phenomena in hearing that it says that when you hear one loud sound, there's masking, which prevents you from hearing things that are at a higher frequency than that. So it's in some sense, it's a sort of anecdotal psychologists might notice this. It turned out at that era, it became very important because there was a transition of the telephone network to be a digital network, and especially for wireless communication, if you can compress speech and transmit it digitally at a lower and lower bit rate, you can pack more speech onto digital transmission lines. So, for example, a transatlantic cable, which is carrying digital calls that has a certain amount of bit rate. If you want to stick more calls in there, you can compress the speech to a higher degree and pack it in more tightly. And also then for wireless communications. So
By the way, sorry to interrupt, but
Yes.
they did this with analog in the analog era as well, right? By limiting the channel bandwidth and Taylor, I think it was 0 to basically a 3 kilohertz.
Exactly.
bandwidth,
The telephone channel has got limitations. It's got a certain amount of background noise, which it's picking up hum and picking up buzz, and it's got a bandwidth, as you mentioned, it's got a bandwidth limit, which is limiting how much information is coming through there. So, but what they wanted to do is, when the transition digital, is to maintain sort of the same perceived quality that it already had, but they'll pack in the bits more tightly. And so it's a fight against, as you compress things, you get more noise. So this is where the psychoacoustic comes in. It says, if you make the observation that low frequencies mask higher frequencies, well, now you don't have to encode the frequencies above a low frequency tone as much because people can't hear it. And it brought in the era of perceptual coding. As opposed to just saying a metric, I want to compress this and re-expand it so it was as close to the original as possible. That's not the criteria anymore. The criteria is, can a person tell the difference between the two? Right. And so now it becomes all based on your hearing ability and everything, and what a human can hear and not hear. Which is also why the frequency range is limited too. I mean, you can't hear very high frequency sounds, much higher than 3 kilohertz, but above 20 nobody can hear, and in most adults it's like 8 or 10 that they can't hear above.
Is it like, in the old RIAA, the pre-emphasis that they used to put on?
Yes.
And de-emphasis at the other end?
Right, there are a lot of perceptual things that you can do to improve the quality of a recording or whatever to try and...
So you're essentially changing the relative weights of the frequencies in real time? Or?
Right. Well, this perceptual coding is even different than that. Say that you cut it up into a low band and a high band, and then you encode the low band with 5 bits of information or something, so you convert it digitally. And then you look at the high band, how many bits do I need here? Well, if this was a very loud sound, I probably don't need anything. I can just throw this away and it'll sound the same. But if it was lower, then I need to put more bits over here, because now people would be able to hear that. If it was completely silent in the low end, they would be able to hear whether that high-pitched sound is present or not. So you're basically doing an allocation of bits to the different parts and allocating your noise margin to the different pieces of the signal.
Right. And then this would have resulted in an actual circuit at some point, right?
Well, this results in actually much more than the circuit. It did result in the standardization of how you encode speech over the networks and everything. So at the time, there was PCM, which was storing things at 64 kilobits. Then there was adaptive PCM, which is lowering the bit in a objective way. It was basically encoding the same thing, but sort of compressing the data. But then you got into these lower bit rate coders, which were SELP was one of them, and different acronyms of things. Now I forgot most of them. But they were pushing the bit rate down until you could, over a digital line, high quality, get the same quality as you were previously setting at 64, get it down to 16 or 15 or 14 kilobits per second. And then you go even further, you get it down to 8 or 4, and it sounds not quite as good, but it was great for cell phones and things like that in digital. And you can't afford very many bits. Right. So that resulted in, since it was AT&T, Bell Labs, it was directly applied work. It was going into the telephone system.
It was applied to the entire
telephone system,
telephone network.
Yeah.
As they transitioned to digital.
Yeah, and they were packing in. Well, they already were transitioning to digital. Now they're saying, can we pack more calls onto the same amount of digital bandwidth that we have?
And this is quite apart from multiplexing or anything else, right?
Right. It allows you to do more multiplexing.
Or modulation methods.
Yeah. Or modulation method. But it is effectively multiplexing. Take that same thing, instead of having one call, now you multiplex 16 calls onto that same line. Yeah.
Wow. Do you remember the standard? Maybe that's too complicated.
I know SELP was one, but a lot of it was just like numbers and ITU, da.
Yeah. Wow, that is a remarkable.
And I wouldn't say, I don't want to overstate it. I worked on a tiny piece of that, of collecting, psychoacoustic data and everything that was going into, sort of metrics of how, if you can collect the data, enough data, then you can write a program that would predict how good this sounds. We call it mean opinion score.
I totally see the link to your dissertation there.
Yeah.
It's very related. And you mentioned earlier that, when you felt a bit isolated on your master's, and the doctoral dissertation gave you the chance to collaborate with a real nice team. Did you find the team approach at Bell Labs too?
Oh, yes.
Very
absolutely.
Collaborative environment?
Absolutely. It was a very collaborative environment. There was really good people to work with and working on things. And
how were you resourced? Pretty well, if you needed anything?
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say. The resources were amazing there. You got everything you want. We had the really nice workstation. At the time, Sun was just like taking off, and so we all had Sun workstations that were on the desk, and that was sort of the cream of everything. So, yes. Anechoic the world's largest anechoic chamber there. So it kept being put in the New York Times or things, the quietest place on Earth. So this gigantic chamber that's you could go into.
How many Life magazine articles on that chamber have there been over this? I remember it very clearly. And then what were they testing in there? Because it was very large, right?
Yeah, there was many different things, but we ran experiments there too. Just in terms of, opinion score, figure out, does this person hear these subtle differences or not, right? So you really need a quiet environment to be able to do that.
Oh, so you run the experiment in the chamber with the people?
With people, yeah. That was rare because, it's expensive and there's a lot of other uses for that, but, there were times that we did that. Mostly we did it in smaller sound chambers, basically room size anechoic chambers. And with headphones, noise canceling, very high-end headphones inside anechoic chambers, inside anechoic rooms, because if you're trying to see if you can tell the difference between that little bit of noise in the background or not, you really need to get rid of fan noise
little clicking
noises.
Whatever. Yeah. Now this is sort of the same problem we had with people. Describing how they perceive sounds, but how did you perceive the anechoic chamber? If you can describe that in words,
it feels like something's missing. Really, you go in there and you don't really notice consciously that it's super quiet, but you just feel like there's there's something missing, right? Just like, we don't notice, the little backgrounds of fans and things, hums in general world. You don't notice that they're missing, but you do have this feeling that this is weird somehow. This is like...
When you speak, what does it sound like?
When you speak, it's just very flat, dead, right? You can still hear yourself, obviously, but there's no reverberation, there's no echo.
Okay. But two people could hear each other if they were
That's fine,
6
yeah.
feet apart
Oh,
or
yeah,
something?
yeah. And it's very clear and everything like that. But it's just very flat and very...
Now your wife, let's give her a name.
Michelle.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Was she working with you at Bell Labs? Or?
No. When I started at Bell Labs, she was still finishing up her PhD.
Oh, that's right.
And then she started working for Ammon and Whitney, which was or it still is, it's a bridge building company. And they're the ones that built the Brooklyn Bridge originally.
Fascinating.
So she was working on structural engineering for them for, designing resistant structures.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was in Manhattan, which was also why we ended up moving to West Village. So then,
That's nice. How far a drive is it from, or did you take the train?
I drove mostly. Sometimes took the train, but it's like a half-hour drive.
Oh, it's very close.
Oh yeah.
Wow. I've never been to New York, believe it or not. So
Oh,
I have
okay.
no conception of how close things are, but
Yeah, from Lower Manhattan, there's the Holland Tunnel that goes to New Jersey. So the Holland Tunnel was, like a 5-minute drive from where we were living. So you just drive down, go through the tunnel, then you're in New Jersey, and then you're on the interstate highway for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
if there's no traffic.
And there was not much traffic?
No, if there's no traffic.
If there's no traffic, yeah.
If you do it at the wrong time, it can take an hour or 2 hours.
Right. What was going on, if you I don't know if you knew, at Bell Labs, were there other interesting projects that you know of at the time that sort of piqued your interest?
Yeah. I actually got involved in a few. One of them was the development of C++. So Bjorn Strastrup was just up the hall from me. And so C++ was really just taking off at that time. Well, not even taking off, it was sort of being seeded and everything. So we'd just written that language and designed it and everything. And so I was using some of the early C++ versions for what I was doing. In fact, I worked on the first vector library for C++. So I wrote the vector library for him that was using effectively GPUs, but other processors to accelerate the computations and everything.
Can you explain for our audience what a vector library does?
Basic programming languages, they have primitives for adding numbers or subtracting, dividing. But often when you're doing a lot of large mathematical problems, like you'll have a vector, like for example, an audio signal is a string of numbers that might be thousands or hundreds of thousands numbers long. Now, if you want to take two of those signals and say add them together, you could just go through and add each of the individual things, but as the length gets bigger and the amount of computation you have, it all gets very slow. So what you want to do is create a library that says, okay, I'm going to give this function in the library two of these long vectors, and its function is just to add them.
Right.
You can build a basic version of that library that internally just runs through them and counts them, but then you could also say, okay, now I know that this computer that I'm running on has this other digital signal processor on it. So I could move those two vectors to the digital signal processor, let it compute it, give it back to me, and then I pass it back to the person that called it. So transparently to the programmer, now this function now just runs 100 times faster than it used to. So that's the idea of a vector library. So C++ in the beginning didn't have a vector library. So I worked with that group and built that.
So vectors, from what I know about Cray research and so on, are all over science and engineering.
Yes.
Right. So,
and you
this
see
would
it,
have been very useful for.
Absolutely, and you see this now with all the machine learning research and work and everything. Is that, I mean, really the whole renaissance of machine learning has really come from having the ability to compute these things quickly and everything. And so the increase in computing speed and the ability to use GPUs to do the processing makes the current AI techniques possible.
Let's just jump back a bit to Bell Labs.
Yep.
And how long were you there? And what was
3 years, I would say. Yeah, through 3.5 years, I think. Yeah, so I was working on the project with the speech coding. I was also, though it's related to that, for sending speech over the telephone lines. The other big application of psychoacoustics to coding is for music. So another group there was working on music encoding. So how many bits do you need to store music and to play it and everything? Now this was just after, I think CDs had come out in maybe 83 or 82 or 83 was the first, commercial use of compact disc and everything. So that was the first exposure that the people had to digital music and everything.
Yes.
And the quality of digital music, which was amazing. I mean, I remember when it first came out, it says, you listen to this, and this is crazy how good the quality is of CDs. But CDs are at a very high data rate. So as soon as you want to be able to store lots of music, or more importantly, to be able to stream it over a digital connection, like a telephone line, you need to compress it. And
in this era, sorry for interrupting, the data rates, people are essentially using modems, right? Dial-up.
Mm-hmm.
This is the dial-up era?
This is the dial-up era. So the typical modems at the time of the Bell Labs were around 9,600 bits per second, 10 kilobits or something. And that was really the high end.
Yeah.
Probably the more common was 1,200, 2,400 bits per second. So if you can imagine, that's bits, first of all, and per second. So 2,400 is 300 bytes per second. Yeah. And there's some overhead there. So downloading a megabyte is a major endeavor. Yeah. And hours of download. So getting music compressed to a lower bit rate is valuable both for storage and also being able to transmit it over digital lines.
And psychoacoustics plays a big role here too,
exactly.
Right? And are you driving towards sort of the MP3
exactly.
edge of things? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So that was that was what came out of all that work is MP3. Well, in the earlier MPEG encoders. So some of the people that were on that group were from Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, which so they started that work there, or they collaborated with Bell Labs and everything. Then went back, and then that's where a lot of the follow-on MP3 yes. work was. So at that time, it was more like the early MPEG encoders, and then it was evolving into MP3.
I think it was Karl-Heinz Brandenburg.
Yeah, so he was there at Bell Labs.
Oh, he was at Bell Labs.
He was like two offices.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
See, I thought the story kind of was a Fraunhofer story, but you're saying there's a Bell link too as well.
Yeah.
Ah.
Well, yeah. They were all right there.
How interesting.
Yeah.
And now, why would Bell be interested in transmitting music?
Well, it's another use of transmitting
for possible a service to customers?
The service to customers. Bell was very interested in everything related to multimedia and things. They were very interested in teleconferencing. They were doing a lot of work on teleconferencing at that time. There was a whole group up the hall from me that was doing virtual presence and everything, basically creating conference rooms with like dummies that had actually all the audios, the speakers and microphones and everything, cameras and everything, and trying to do remote video conferencing.
What year is this? This is very early.
This is like the late 80s, like 88, 89 things. So there was a lot going. I mean, like you said, there was the technology is already there. It was just in different pockets and everything. Yeah. So they were doing, video teleconferencing with presence and everything.
Okay, so that explains why they care about sending signals of any kind.
And so they cared about music, they cared about audio, they cared about video, they cared about all this, Now
the video would have been quite a challenge, I imagine.
But it's not at all infeasible because although we're talking about dial-up modems and things like that, the bulk of what they're interested in didn't really care about modems, because there is digital subscriber lines. You can get a T1 line or a higher thing.
Leased lines.
Leased lines, yeah.
Right.
So they were at the kind of speeds that we already have. They were megabits or tens of megabits per second. So similar to the kind of speeds
they're very lucrative for the phone company.
Very lucrative for the phone company.
If I recall, yeah.
So it's not. It was completely feasible for a company to have an office in New York and an office in San Francisco and have a digital connection between them at megabit speeds that you could run live video and everything over.
Interesting. In the early days of what it was called teleprocessing,
yep.
IBM had was, made a big splash when you were able to connect 360s and terminals in different cities together and stuff.
Yeah.
And IBM had its own thing going on with networking too, really early on. So.
Correct. Yeah.
But anyway, so Bell Labs. Is there anything before we move on? Anything else you want to say about Bell? Your time there, or
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Karl Heinz, because that actually tied into some of the later stuff too, because I had communicated with him following this time at Bell Labs too, about the MP3 issues and everything too.
So let's see what's next on the.
Yeah, so let's see.
You're just leaving Bell Labs?
Leaving Bell Labs. So Michelle and I decided to get married. I proposed to her in Central Park. Oh, nice. But she wanted to move back to Montreal. So we decided that we'd move to Montreal. So I left Bell Labs in early 1990, and we moved back there. While I was at Bell Labs, it was one of the interesting things that I noticed was, doing all the audio work, that it was really hard to get audio interfaces, audio hardware that would actually do the kind of quality audio that we needed. There wasn't really, we were sort of building our own stuff.
Like A to Ds?
A to Ds and D to As and things like that. So there was definite need there. So what I decided to do was to start a company when we moved to Montreal.
I knew it was going to happen sooner or later.
Yeah.
That's great.
And this was it was a completely bootstrap company. There was no external funding at all of it. But effectively, Bell Labs funded it, and because they needed these interfaces, and they needed several of them. So when I was leaving, it was on great terms and everything. They were trying to get me to stay, but I was decided. But I suggested, well, our group needs these digital interfaces. Other groups need them. How about I'll design and build digital interfaces, and sell them to you. And they were great. It's a big need that we have for a lot of different things. And I also said, well, how about you pay for them now?
It's not net 30. It's the opposite of net 30.
Yeah. So and they agreed, and so they bought in the order of 20 or 30 of these devices at $5,000 each.
Oh wow. Can you tell us a bit about the circuit? What was on it?
Yeah. So it's basically a rack-mounted device that has a digital signal processor inside. It has a CPU inside. It can run programs. It actually does not have an analog digital or digital analog converter, which is interesting because it is actually a sound interface. What it has is an interface to digital audio tape machines. So at that time, both with CDs and digital audio tape, they had a standard digital output. So it was like either fiber optic or a coaxial output to carry the digital data signal.
Right. Is that the weird little SPDIF connector?
Yeah, SPDIF was the eventual standardization of that of that. So they were accessible to get really high quality digital to analog converters built into a digital audio tape machine.
Oh, how fascinating!
Okay.
So they bought DAT machines, and
so they would bought that. So then Bell Labs had a lot of DAT machines. They were using it for a lot of that work and everything, for the audio work. And they also had studio type audio equipment that was going into things. But what they didn't have is any way to get that stuff from that to a computer to do analysis or back again. Right. Okay. So what I built was a thing I called the DAT link, which was basically taking a computer interface, a SCSI interface at the time, on one side, and then a digital audio SPDIF or fiber optic outputs. It actually had multiple. There was like 3 different standards, so it had all 3 standards, or 3 semi-standards. And then inside it had digital signal processor, because the other issue was sometimes the formats that were stored on digital audio tape were not the formats that people would work with on the computer, and it would take a lot of compute time to do conversions, and a lot of the conversion software wasn't very good. So inside the box, it was taking the digital audio in, it was doing sample rate conversion, it was doing filtering, it was doing all in the digital domain, and then it was outputting the converted output that it would run to your computer, and you could store it on your computer, and you could even real-time run everything real-time. When that was really the big limitation of the sample rate conversion, is if you have an audio file that's sampled at 16 kilohertz on your computer and you want to be able to play that in real time through all this pipeline. It has to get up converted to all these things with low latency. So that was the function of this box. It was taking that digital stream and with milliseconds of latency, outputting to the correct output type.
What was your favorite, well, not your favorite, but what was the DSP at the brains of this
That was
thing?
a TI, the
56001 or the TMS 320?
oh no, actually it wasn't. It was Western Digital. It was the AT&T one, the DSP 32C, which I guess was eventually.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You'd use an AT&T
Yeah,
chip.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Later on, I used some of the TI ones for other things, but yeah, that was the DSP 32C.
Oh, good. And did you just build these like on your kitchen table? And
Pretty
stuff
much,
like
yeah.
that?
We had a condo in Montreal, and I worked from home. While Michelle went to work, she was working at Lavallee then in Montreal, and then I would work on the designing the circuits and everything, and then I developed a network of subcontractors in Montreal that would do, print a circuit board design, do stuffing, do, enclosures, then do packaging and all that stuff. So I ended up with a whole pipeline to do it with a sort of a one-person operation at the beginning, and then expanded that to 2 people, and the most we ever were 3 in that company.
I'm glad you made the decision to use subcontractors and not just do your own PCB artwork and drill the holes and do like.
No,
I guess that you really can't do that at this level. These people expect a really like professional product. And,
yeah.
So it's hard to do that on your own.
You can do a prototype.
Yeah,
yeah. And now it's even easier. And now you can get the circuit boards so quickly and everything so cheaply.
It is remarkable. Yeah.
But at that time. Yeah, I mean, it was still pretty good. I mean, it was the infrastructure that found there was good. It wasn't that common, I guess, in Canada and in that area, as opposed to here in Silicon Valley, to be able to get that sort of infrastructure. But it was present and was able to get people that did the job well.
Can you explain just quickly, before we leave this topic, how your device was part of the flow, the larger flow of which it was a part?
Yeah, so I mean, it had ended up with a lot of different customers, which was interesting. So the first customer was with Bell Labs, just for doing acoustics research. So it's just I have a very high quality signal that I want to get out to headphones for somebody to hear, or I want to do a recording at very high quality that I can analyze. So that was the first application.
And then ultimately have that audio waveform available in digital form.
Exactly,
Right.
to acquire it in digital form.
Whatever, processing.
Yeah, for doing analysis or for doing storage or for doing whatever you want to do with it. Soon after, though, then there was interest from the music recording industry that was like, well, here's a good way to get data from a recording studio into a computer to do analysis and do things. So a high quality version of, and at the time there was, DigiDesign, who did a lot of things, was just starting. Maybe even hadn't started then. Yeah, actually, I was interested. I skipped that part. I actually did a part-time job when I was in Stanford doing my PhD. There was a company called Opcode Systems in Palo Alto that was doing digital interfaces, and
I remember that.
Yeah, and I went to. They just started, and I wanted a music interface for just for a keyboard.
Like a MIDI interface?
MIDI interface.
Yeah, right.
And so I saw that they had them, and I saw they were in Palo Alto. So they just drove over to where they were doing it. It was just like a little low-rise, building. And I met, and the only person there was the guy that started the company, Dave Oppenheimer, I think. And I saw him and they said, "Oh, I wanted to buy one of those MIDI interfaces." And I said, "Oh, sure, we can do that." And then we started talking, and he said, "Oh, I told him I was Stanford, and he was asking what I'm doing." He said, "Oh, well, maybe you could help. We need this thing for this thing called this time code synchronization. So we've got a lot of, we think that, or I think, it was probably more I than we. It would be really useful to be able to synchronize audio with SMPTE, which is the motion picture standard for doing it. So there was a MIDI time code that had MIDI time, and there was SMPTE in the motion picture industry. But nobody has any way of converting between the two. And so think that's something you could design. And I said, yeah, that sounds like good. You know, I mean, how much would it be? You know, like I make some money. I'm thinking, you know, I could charge him $1,000 or something to do something like that. I mean, I'd done some little interfaces for other people before. And yeah, I could do an interface like that, you know. And he said, well, we don't have much money, but we could give you like, you know, if we sell them, we give you like 5% of the sales or something like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's going to be anything, you know, maybe you'll sell 10 of them. But I agreed. And then it took way more work than I thought. It took like a lot of evenings getting it to work right. And then I'd come back to him and show him how it worked. And he'd say, oh, it's not quite good enough. You know, it needs to be handle these noisy conditions, need to do this. And, oh, okay. And so I was completely like, oh, so frustrated with this whole thing and saying I'm going to get nothing out of it. Yeah. So I finished it finally. And then like a year later, I got my first royalty check, which was like $100 or something. I said, well, I got something. And the next quarter, I got like $1,000. And it just kept going up. And then it ended up integrated in many products that they had. And so it was like, you know, tens of thousands of dollars coming from this thing. So I had this idea that, you know, at that point, that was why I wanted to come back to that. It sort of inspired this idea of doing interfaces of things. It's like it could be a profitable business and everything. Yeah. And so doing the digital audio interface, which is just really converting from one format to another, similar to what I did for opcode, it's something attractive. And it turned out it was. And it was used in actually, and that's why I come back to also in some of the same products, you know, like those, what DigiDesign or other people had at the time, then you end up with this MIDI timecode converter, or you end up with a digital audio interface.
I can see how your product would be bought by every studio in the world, probably, like doing film work, for example.
Right, for doing that conversion. And so it's ended up being the inside other products. It was kind of hidden, but that circuit or that design was...
Did it do a shrink, or?
Well, it was basically on a like a little Motorola processor, so it was all self-contained.
It was just a small board.
It was just a little sub-circuit that was ended up in many products.
Okay, so it's mainly software then.
Software that's running on a little processor.
Yeah.
So do it all digitally and everything.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So then started that. We had like, it was like Michelle and I would celebrate every time we would sell one. You know, you know, $5,000 sale or like $1,000.
What was your cost of goods?
Yeah, about $1,000.
About $1,000. Oh, great.
For the cost of everything. So it was a high margin business. Yeah. No, you know, only really one or two other employees just to help support things, and so. But
and what a great personal satisfaction too, like selling something you made, and it's you know, everything about it is, it's your thinking is imminent in everything in that circuit, and it's a very, must have been very rewarding to just sort of ship product, as they call it, but you know, that's part of your soul is in that machine, right? So
exactly. It was fun. And the uses of it were really varied. We had one that was a research group that was investigating whale sounds, bought a bunch of them. So they would put them actually on the ships that they were going out and use them for, you know, converting from the hydrophone data in real time to the.
Oh, that's fun.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter. You're still in Montreal, and what's going on next?
So while I'm in Montreal, I also started teaching. So I took a consulting professorship at McGill, and I started teaching digital signal processing to some of the students there. So like an adjunct professor. So that was good. I was getting to meet students and everything. I actually hired one of those students, Eric Warren, that was in my class, and ended up coming to the company on DatLink and future companies as well. But one of the things that happened there is that I was talking with another professor there quite a bit. You know, he was the one that was the regular faculty that was teaching the signal processing and everything. And we were talking a lot about, that was Peter Cable. We were talking a lot about, you know, digital telephone network and about modems and the idea of things. And, you know, he was sort of, you know, chatting about the whole thing, and was talking about, you know, the fact that really the whole network is digital. So, I mean, we're doing these modems, but the network itself is already carrying stuff digitally all the way from the central office, or between the central offices and everything, the backhaul and everything. So if I phone you, I have a little piece of wire that goes to my central office that's analog, And then after that, everything's digital until it gets a mile away from your end, and then it's back to analog.
Good old copper.
Yeah. And so people were addressing this at the time already in terms of ISDN, Integrated Services Data Network, and digital subscriber lines, DSL, was all happening, those ideas and everything. But all of those required changing that last mile of copper. Okay? So,
which you really can't do, right?
Well, actually, let me back. It's not. I misstated that. You're not actually changing the copper, but you're putting a new adapter on the ends of the copper. So you're putting a new device at the central office line. So instead of creating an analog signal there, you have to have encode it digitally onto that copper line and with a different modulation scheme. And then you put a device at the subscriber end. So you can use that. That copper wire was already proven that you could carry high data rates, megabits of data over that local copper wire. So you basically got a network that's all digital. You've got a copper wire that can carry megabits of data, and then we're stuck, though, sticking an audio-like signal onto it because of the hardware, that little piece of hardware that's sitting at the central office. You know, in the long term, you'd say, well, we'll just change all the central offices, but that was just like infrastructure, major infrastructure issue. Yeah. And it's what's happened now. I mean, you can get digital subscriber lines pretty easily. But at the time, it was a daunting task to do that. And you can't do it on a per-person basis. You can't say, I want a digital line. You'd have to have somebody go into the central office and change it. So we had a lot of discussions about this. And at one point, you know, I had the idea, said, well, wait a second. Sometimes the other end that I'm talking to does have a digital subscriber line. Like if I'm talking to another person, we both have these copper wires. But if I'm talking to somebody that's, for example, serving up a music service, a digital music service, well, since they're doing that, they could afford to buy a digital line to the telephone network, right? Because they're a company that's in the business of providing digital services.
What is the difference between a digital line and an analog line?
Well, they actually get a T1 or something, some actual thing that's carrying digital from their premises all the way into the telephone network.
Would that not necessarily be fiber, but it
could be fiber. It could be fiber. It could be copper, but it's high data rate copper. It doesn't require. It's never going into an analog waveform that looks like speech.
Right.
Okay.
But it requires like a special technician to come out and run the cable, run the wire.
But we're talking about a business on that end. We're talking about a company, so it's in an office building or a server room somewhere that they're running it. Yeah. Okay, and that was common. The companies already had digital connections into the telephone network. Or AOL, for example, right? AOL would have digital. They would have a bank of modems, right, to have all the dial-in, but they'd also have digital lines to go out to their providers of other content and everything, okay? So they would have a mix of the two. So in the discussion I was observing, well, actually half the problem's already solved, because if I want to talk to AOL or a digital provider of music, then most of the network is already digital. It's only my last mile that's the only problem. And also, they don't really care about what I have to say. I mean, I may give them commands, mouse clicks or keyboard, but this is all super low data rate. So the only issue now is getting data from the far side of this little subscriber line to my side of it, downward, one way on one end. So it's very asymmetric. It was sort of everybody looking at it as sort of a four-piece problem. You have to get up on this side, down on this side, up on this side, down on this side. So it was all these four links that were a problem, and each of those links creates noise and creates problems. So when you look at that whole problem as saying, well, no, it's only this one step. We have digital on this end, and we have a voice signal on the other end. Then the solution sort of comes obvious that all you have to do is try and work backwards. You just, whatever signal, just forget about that it's an analog line. Just send your bits, just raw bits, as whatever the bits you wanted to send. And the phone line will do weird things. It will make weird noises and everything. But at the other end, it's just got to work backwards. It's got to figure out, oh, given this result, what was the bits on the other end? Which was a completely different approach than everybody had been taking about modems. Modems were all about encoding the data as a sound that you could then listen for that sound and decode it back to data. This was a non-modem, effectively. This was just saying, I'm not even going to try and map it to a sound. All I'm going to do is feed my digital to analog converter 8 bits, a bit stream, and it's a completely random bit stream, effectively. It's going to do random stuff.
But is it like still voltage levels, right? Being
still
sent,
voltage level. It's still going to create an analog signal.
But not tones.
But not tones, no patterns particularly. It's just going to create whatever if I keep giving it the same bit pattern, it'll just give a flat line for a while, right? So absolutely just getting rid of all the encoding. And it turns out that that's feasible. You can actually get the signal at the other end and figure out the only way I could have seen this particular signal is if the bits up there were this particular pattern. Oh, yeah. So it works backwards. So it gives you back, it basically means that now you've got the same bits that central office had. So you've eliminated the whole, that copper wire, the effect of the copper wire going to analog. Right. So that was the idea that came out of those discussions at McGill, or the idea that I brought home from those discussions, and so then I said, well, that's really a cool idea, especially now that people are starting to use the internet on a. This was, again, this was like 93.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, we were just about to discuss. We were discussing your observation about. Digital lines and the transmission of information over existing analog infrastructure,
right,
and those kind of things. So tell us a bit more. Why don't you continue the story for us?
Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention before, and it's important, I think, is the motivation for being interested in all these telephone lines. So, as I mentioned earlier, at Bell Labs, and worked with on the psychoacoustics and was interested in low bit rate speech coding. Specifically, I was really interested in the music side. And I had the idea then that wouldn't it be great if you could just listen to any piece of music you wanted at home? You didn't have to go and buy something, you could just choose it. Now, contextualize it. Obviously, we do that all the time now, but that didn't exist then. And it wasn't
This
really.
This is 1990?
Yeah, 1992, I think it was. Right? So, first of all, it just didn't exist, right? Even though there was some online stuff, like AOL and things like that, and the internet was just, the internet existed for a long time, in terms of being able to send data around, send email, send things like that. I had a first email account in, 1979 or something, but
there was no web.
There was no web,
right?
Exactly. The web was just happening then. At NCSA, there was just the beginnings of HTML was around then, and the use of the web and the Mosaic browser and things like that. So there was definitely no music on demand. Right. So I was thinking about this and thinking, well, the stuff what I'd seen at Bell Labs with the predecessor of MP3 that was going on was getting lower and lower bit rates, and modem speeds were increasing, and by that time it was up to like 28.8 or maybe 33.6 kilobits per second on the modem. So I was really actively trying to bridge that gap. I was saying if we can get the data rate up as high as the music compression rate matching, because there was a gap at that point. There was music compression was running at 140 kilobits per second or something. And data was 28, as I said. So we had a 5x gap or something between the two. Is to get those to converge, then you can do music on demand. And then you can have a dial-up thing that gives you music. So it was the idea of I called the project Music Fax. A music fax. Like facsimile, fax machine.
Fax.
Music fax.
Interesting. Music fax.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of a silly name. But so I started communicating more with Karl Heinz Brandenburg and what the current status is, and going back and forth saying, well, how much bit rate can we get this down to, right? Could we actually get it down to a region that is, with the latest work and everything, maybe not CD quality, but really good quality over a lower bit rate? And we went back and forth by email for a long time, and really the conclusion was, well, we could get down to 60 or so kilobits per second, but we can't get, going below that, it's really degrading the music quality.
And that's where the ear begins to notice.
You begin to notice, and the current techniques weren't able to get below about 60 kilobits without degrading the quality, perceptually degrading the quality. They're already, if you looked at the actual waveform, they're completely different, but the ear heard them the same. So the gap was narrowing, but it was still off. So I'm saying, well, if we get the modem data rate up higher, then we could bridge this gap. Yeah. And the thought process went saying, well, if you do have music on demand, you've got this big server somewhere in a server farm. They have digital line connections to the phone system, so there's no problem there. They can pump digital data all the way to your central office, but it just can't get that last mile over the copper without changing an infrastructure. So it said, when you focus it like that, you think, okay, it's an asymmetric situation. We don't care about upstream data. We really care about downstream data. We don't care about the far end having a copper wire. All we care about is this very, very specific case. And that's where the discussions came, and then thinking, oh, well, actually, that's easy. We just ignore the problem. We just send the data as if it's just data, and then work. And it turned out that worked. That actually did something. And so all of a sudden, the gap was met between the music on demand and the...
And I'm sorry, I just missed, what was the breakthrough there that allowed you to...
It's kind of strange. It was really, the breakthrough was really the observation that that we only cared about one of the links, and we only cared about it one way. Okay. We're not trying to solve the general problem of how you send data from point A to point B when both people are just dialing into, right? Both ends have a modem. One end doesn't have a modem, they just have direct connection, and the other end only needs a one-way modem. They don't need a two-way modem. Okay. So you simplify the problem, and then you realize that we actually don't even need any modem because we can do this reverse channel characterization. So work backwards from whatever audio signal we receive at home, and reverse calculate what the bits were going into the to the codec at that end. So so you thought of that and said, wow, that could possibly work. And so then I ran a simulation just using MATLAB. So I still do a lot of stuff in MATLAB. MATLAB's a really useful tool for this kind of thing. But so I built a simulation that, I said, okay, I know what the noise characteristics, I know what all the things are. It was actually really easy. It's like you build this, you add the noise, you put the thing into the simulation, you create a synthetic signal, and then write a little program to decode it, to work backwards. And it turned out it worked. I mean, it was able to decode this thing that went in. And so it said, wow, that's great. That's a solution. And as soon as it came up with a solution of how to do the music, I realized, well, wait a second. We're having this blossoming of the internet. Everybody wants to download information, download image, download pages from the internet. That's all one way also. It's exactly the same problem. The internet provider has a direct connection. It says, all of a sudden I realized, oh, this is way bigger. I don't actually have to build the music demand service. Yeah. Just the modem itself is going to be the single value. Right. The ability to download at a higher data rate. So that was the beginning of that. So wrote a patent application for that in 93, I think, 93 or 92, I forget now which it was, and started prosecuting that patent in Montreal. Soon after that, we sort of realized, Michelle and I realized that a lot of this, sort of the patenting, the legal infrastructure for the whole idea of licensing a technology thing was definitely blossoming more in Silicon Valley than there. That there was a lot of knowledge about that kind of, doing that kind of transaction, doing that kind of thing. And also we missed a lot of our friends that were here and everything. So we decided to move back to California, to Silicon Valley. And then I started, actually didn't jump in it right away. We came down here. I was still doing the DAT link, the DAT link device. So sort of moved the company that was doing the DAT link down to California, and was continuing on that. And like the student that I had up there in McGill, he also moved down, Eric. So we sort of set up shop in Silicon Valley, started doing, expanding that and trying some other little products. And in parallel was working on this patent for the modem. And then maybe it was another 6 months or a year later before we realized, there's all these other, the DAT link, the other projects are all really interesting, but this modem thing is like really a real, game changer if it would actually work. So I decided to start, I should try and license it to a modem maker to see what the interest is. So that started the whole, triggered a process of, going out and trying to shop around this idea to modem makers.
Did you have a working, I guess.
I had a working thing. It was
Yeah.
a MATLAB program.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So I never actually built one. I mean, I knew how to build it. I could have built it. I had actual real data from a phone line, so I could like collect some samples, some signals from the phone line that would be exactly the same we would get from this device. And I can take that signal and put it on the computer and run the algorithm to decode it. So I know I could do it. It's just a matter of, I didn't actually take that algorithm and put it onto a DSP chip and put it into a box that would do it.
So the patent actually has no specific embodiment of...
Well, the embodiment is a description of how to do it.
Is the description.
Yeah. So the embodiment is...
But it's not reduced to practice, is what I should say. Or is it?
It is.
Oh, okay.
I learned a lot about patent law. Reduction to practice doesn't... You don't actually have to build something physical to reduce to practice.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You just have to explain how to build it.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So the actual reduction to practice, this requires you to enable somebody else to build it.
Right.
And
so you get a great lawyer who
yeah.
describes it technically.
Yeah. And there was not really, there was no issue there. It would have been easy to actually physically build one if we needed to, but there was like, the enablement was already there.
Describe the process of shopping this around. Did you have like an agent or somebody working for you?
No, I'd had some experience, before with the DAT link company. There was a lot of times that I felt that I didn't have the business background or the thing to negotiate things, and so I would, some friend of friends said, did an MBA, would be a consultant or something and do it, and it was always, It was
Not
never
that useful.
It was never that useful because it came down to a lot of the stuff for. Once you're past the first meeting, you're sort of, it's between other scientists or engineers that are making the decisions and everything, and it doesn't help to have the business guys in the room to do that. It's once you get the meeting, it's just a matter of talking shop, really.
Right. It's kind of like the way diplomacy works, right? The ambassadors
Yeah.
talk, and then the actual people work on the actual practical aspects.
Right.
The people beneath them make it work, make it happen. So tell us the companies that you approach, because they're basically like
Yeah.
all the major companies.
Yeah. So so it started off not so great. So the first one I talked to, and I sort of researched the companies. The biggest player in the modem market was Rockwell.
Okay.
So they were building a lot of the existing modems at that time. So I contacted them and said, I have an idea for this, and they responded. And I had I think they get a lot of people coming in with ideas. But what makes a difference is, I was at Bell Labs and I was at Stanford PhD and I've done this stuff and worked in here, and I think I have a way of increasing data rates for modems. We'd like to discuss. So that was sort of the lead into the whole thing. So they responded. I'm not even sure if I sent to anybody else. I think they were the first ones I contacted, and they responded, and they scheduled a meeting, and I went down to LA, where they were headquartered, somewhere in LA. And met with their modem director, the head of the modem division, and some of the scientists there and everything, and explained what I was doing and everything, confidentially, like a confidential presentation. And they had questions, and they understood the idea and everything, and they thought that was great. They said, okay, this is interesting, we'll get back to you. And and then I contacted some other companies. I contacted U.S. Robotics was the other big player in the field at the time, and contacted them and was scheduling a meeting to meet with them. Actually, well, I'll come back to U.S. Robotics. Actually, I'll tell. It was funnier or more interesting the way that worked. Meanwhile, Rockwell came back with an offer. It said, "Okay, we'd like to, purchase your intellectual property, purchase your patent and everything, and we would offer, I think it was like $500,000 or something. Let's just say that's what we'd, and I thought, wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. But I already realized that it was going to be worth more than that in the longer term. Yeah. So I was continuing to talk to others. I contacted U.S. Robotics. I talked to the director there, Michael Seidman, and had him got him on the phone. It was I think that was actually a cold call. I don't even think I emailed them first. I just cold called and said, I have a modem thing, and they redirected me to him, and he says, yeah, and I said, I'm at Stanford, da da da. Oh, okay, and I said, I've waited for modems to go faster. And Michael recounted the story after. He said, they'd been trying to get modems to go faster, okay? Yeah. And they realized, and there's this whole thing called the Shannon information theory, which says, theoretically, given all the parameters of that copper line and what's going on, that the maximum speed would be 35 kilobits per second. You can't go faster than that. It was theory, right? So they were 95% of the way to the theoretical limit. And Michael had this engineer that worked with him, Andy Norell, which is like a genius engineer. He's really amazing, understands modems and everything perfectly. And Michael recounted, every 6 months or so, he'd talk to Andy and say, you sure there's no way that we can go faster? And Andy would say, no, you can't go faster than that. You can't, this is the limit. There's not any way that goes. So, okay. And so Michael's on the phone with me, and I say I have a way of going faster, and a lot of people think so, but we think it's the max speed. And I say, well, I've got these credentials, I've worked at Bell Labs, I know that. He said, wait a second, I got to get somebody else in the room too. I get Andy, and Andy comes in on the conference call, and asking, and Michael asking, is there any way to go faster than 33? He says, no, 35 is the limit. And theoretically, and I said, well, you can do it like this. I say in like 3 sentences. You could do this and this and this. And then he says, oh, yeah, that would work.
So much for the limit.
Yeah, it was just like...
The hard and fast limit.
Right, because the question wasn't that the limit was wrong. The limit's correct. It was what the parameters you put into the calculation of what the limit is.
I thought so, yeah. There's something right there.
One of the things that goes into that is how much noise there is that it's picking up. And there is a certain amount of noise. And if you calculate it, the noise is going to limit how much speed you can get. The issue is the noise is not like noise from a fan or noise from a random source. It's noise from the conversion of the digital data into analog data. So there's a little difference there.
Quantization noise.
Quantization noise.
Right.
And the thing is, when you work backwards like this, you're actually, the noise is no longer noise. It's a predictable quantity. Right. So you can actually subtract it out again. So now the noise is effectively the leftover, the electrical noise, which
and
is
the limit no longer applies.
The limit now is suddenly 10-fold or 100-fold higher.
Oh, interesting. So, wow. Oh.
So what was interesting, though, too, to me, was that it only takes 1 or 2 sentences to convey the entire invention to somebody that's in the field. It's just like once you say, do this and this and this, it's just like that's all you need. And then you realize, oh, yeah, you can do it. So at the fundamental, it's super simple. It's super... simple to explain.
Do you remember those 3 sentences?
I don't actually remember exactly, but okay. I could restate the sort of a thing. It's just like...
So why don't you?
Yeah, it's just like that, well, maybe, can I do that? Yeah, you don't actually need to modulate anything. You just apply the bits at one end. You get a signal out that's going to depend on what those bits were, and then you work backwards to figure out what the bits must have been to give you that signal. And for somebody in the modem industry, it's sort of completely the wrong way of doing things when you first look at it, because you're not doing any of these fancy modulation schemes or anything. On the other hand, when you think about it that way, you realize, yeah, you could calculate the bits back there. That would not be that hard.
Can you explain what you mean by work backwards for a layman?
Sure. Yeah. and it's sometimes difficult to gauge what. So the idea is, you know, if you send some digital waveform, it's stepping up in little things like that. Okay. When you convert it into analog, you get a smooth thing that looks like this. Now, if you just look at that smooth one, and you know that the only things that the other end could have done is put a level here or a level here or a level there, and you know what the timing was, that it was only for this time window that it could set it for here, now this time window could set it for here and there, then you could say there's only a finite number of possibilities. Either that level was here or was here or was here, and this one was here or here or here. When you see that continuous waveform, you say, okay, if it was the levels were here and here and here, we'd get something different. We'd get a different waveform. If it was here and here. And if you work backwards, what I'm saying work backwards is you find that pattern that must have been present there that would give the thing that you observed. So now you know what the levels were at each of those time frames, and that's exactly the bit rate that the telephone network is using internally.
Right.
That's
what is that a form of error correction? Or
not really. I mean, and that's again, that's the way that people would approach it. Usually they would apply algorithm and then they would add extra bits to correct any errors. This is just
because when you theoretically, I'm just guessing, but
yeah.
If you increase the speed, the error rate would increase, maybe.
Right, but in this case, we don't have any control of the speed or the thing. This is all governed by the telephone network. Okay. The telephone network is running at 8,000 samples per second. It's running a very fixed rate. Every 1/8,000 of a second, it sends a new 8-bit number. Okay, so that's 64 kilobits per second. So every 1/8,000 of a second, it's got one number, and then it converts that number into a level. So that's that step. So if you know in this time window, it was step number 122, then you know those 8 bits that were there at that time, because it was the 8 bits that encode 122. Nice. And now you move over another 1/8,000 of a second, you figure out what number that was. And now again, you've got 1 out of 256 levels. So you say that was level number 210. You put those together now, and you've effectively got 8 bits of information from that first time frame, 8 bits from the next one. So you've got all 64 kilobits.
That are known to be correct.
That are known to be there, right? They're the bits that are there. You can't get more than that. Well, now I'm saying a theoretical limit. But this one, it was already digitally sent through the network at 64 kilobits per second. And now it's just, we're working backward to figure out what those 64 kilobits per second.
Is there a technical term for that procedure that looks back?
Well,
or the essence of your patent.
Yeah, it's just channel. I mean, part of it, what people call channel characterization. So it's like figuring out what the channel is doing, how it takes your signal, your digital step signal, and converts it into an analog signal and goes through it. So it's characterizing your channel that's coming from the central office to your home.
And I'm guessing that for those of us of a certain age who have heard the sound of those modems, one of those weird sounds is the equalization sound, maybe?
Yeah, yeah. So there's, so this is very different. The up to 33.6, all the sounds you hear are a different character from the 56K modem.
Yes.
So those ones, they're designing a pattern of sounds in sort of in a, you can imagine a space of frequencies and of offset in time, phase. And they're mapping out a pattern, a constellation they call it, of all these different positions. And each position in that space carries a certain number of bits, you know. So if you have a constellation of 16 different positions you could be in frequency and phase, you get 4 bits of information from that. And so a lot of the ping pong you hear at the beginning is mapping out that constellation space to figure out how far apart different points are in there. Like they're sort of fuzzy points because of noise being added, and you don't want them to overlap, otherwise you make a mistake and you have to error correct it, as you mentioned. So the ping pong is figuring out this map of constellations, and figuring out how close you can make all these, which then ultimately gives you the bit rate. For a 33.6 modem, if everything's clean, those constellations are separate. You get, I don't remember, probably 128 points in the constellation or something like that. But if the line's noisier, it'll downgrade. It'll maybe only give you 28, or it gives you 14 kilobits or whatever, depending how those constellations.
So it steps down.
It steps down
required.
gracefully so that you can get something to work. It's different in the 56K modem because all it needs to do is just apply random bits for a while, a known pattern of random bits. So it implies, okay, both ends know I'm going to send a 42, then a 78, then a 126, and then a da-da-da-da. Just this sequence of bits. And the other end is just saying, okay, I know what the sequence of bits coming in. I know what I see. What was the mapping function that changed this to this? Right. And then take the inverse of that mapping function to go the other way. Yeah. So it's a completely different approach. Computationally, it's way easier. The 56K modem takes much less processing power, much less. Where people had gotten with all these constellations and everything is very complex signal processing, very complex, as you said, channel equalization, first of all, and applying all of these different techniques that people have learned over the years to really try and squeeze out that information.
Does the channel equalization kind of characterize the expected maximum bit rate?
Yeah, I mean, it's two things. The channel equalization is sort of, there's a spectrum of frequencies, right? So you want to know where you've got lots of things getting through. Okay. You can boost up the things that are low and keep the things that are high. Yeah. Okay, that's one thing. But then there's also noise added to that. So then the constellation pattern is separating points in that space from each other by more than the noise is fuzzing them out. Right. Yeah, that's sort of a quick tutorial on both existing modem or prior modem technology and then 56K technology.
Did I don't remember. Did anything happen after 56K? Did we go faster?
No.
No.
Because it's this theory limit is hard in the sense that the rest of the phone network is only sending 64 kilobits up to the central office. So if you want to go higher than that, then you have to change something internally because the bits aren't there.
Right.
Yeah. The like T1 line is subdivided into, I forget now, it's 16 or maybe 16 subchannels. So 64. Yeah, probably 16. So each of those has 64 kilobits per second. Yeah. So that's it. I mean, when you make that that call to the phone call to anyone, in the middle, you've got 64 kilobits. So it doesn't matter if you were able to compensate more for the copper line, you're still limited. The middle channel is already digital.
I remember in engineering play, we did a little phone lab. We had SLICs and subscriber loop interface circuit, and the TSAC, the time slot assignment circuit.
Oh yeah.
It was really fun, actually, knowing how the phone system works.
Yeah, it's quite sophisticated.
Tell us about the modem and what happened. I mean, it was obviously a home run for you. And
so Michael Seidman made a huge difference. I mean, at U.S. Robotics. So he basically, as I said, I phone him. He's asked Andy. Andy hears it. Andy says, "Oh yeah, that will work." And then they say, "Okay, can you come out here and talk to us?" And
that's great. I love it.
And he was such a he is such a respectable businessman. He's a guy that, here's something of value. I'm going to pay you the value for that, right? Says, we're both going to do really well because we've been trying to increase the modem speed, and this is going to increase the modem speed.
U.S. Robotics owned this 56K modem space, I think.
Yeah. So they came out and we negotiated the license for a few months and executed that at significantly more than what Rockwell wanted to pay. And meanwhile, though, Rockwell realized that here they are, they're head competitors with U.S. Robotics, right? They're the two dominant forces with $1 billion market or something. So what's their choice now? They realize, now if U.S. Robotics goes up here and they're stuck here, they're basically going to lose all their market. So they figured they're going to do, as I said, it's easy to convey, right? That meeting with them was enough. So they started doing it anyway. Okay. So they basically built their version of that. So U.S. Robotics called it X2, and Rockwell called it K56. And as I mentioned, you could go to 64, but Michael, rightly so, and with Andy and others, decided, well, let's just promise 56.
Ride the wave.
And then we might be able to get, it may actually run, and it does actually run higher than 56. It can run up to 64 depending on the condition. But it was a really good call because it meant that, you know, most of the time you would actually get 56. Sometimes you get a little bit more. But if we marketed or positioned it as a 64K modem, then it would always be falling. It would never exceed, but it would sometimes fall short.
Yeah. Also, just like from my naive perspective, the difference is so marginal. Are people really going to spend another $300 to get the
56 to 64.
12 kilobits per second more, or whatever it is?
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. Well, that's great. So,
so they both did it, and they both ended up launched.
did you file an interference against Rockwell or anything? Or?
Well, they didn't have any patents. I mean, filing an interference is really if two people file a patent.
From your patent, though.
Right. Well, they infringed it.
They did infringe it.
They did infringe it, and there was a long, protracted lawsuit.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I just wanted for the record to know kind of what close the chapter on that.
Yeah. Well, there's the chapter's far from.
Oh,
there was a ton of litigation.
Yeah.
So Wilson Cicini here in Palo Alto, represented me, and so first of all, Rockwell basically stole it and did it, right? So it was not only infringement, but misappropriation of trade secrets because it was confidential disclosure to them. It was all sorts of things. They were under so they offered money, and then I said no, and they wouldn't do it based on, is my take on it. Here's an independent inventor. It's not a company. It's just some guy. I mean, we can do this, and we can spend $10 million on legal, and he's never going to be able to fight us and everything. So he'll just have to eventually, he'll take whatever we give him. And that's what would have happened, except that Michael Seidman came along and said, oh, this is a really good thing. We're going to make a lot of money, both of us. Here's a ton of money. And then when they launched it, they said, you know, you might want to go after our competitor too, and with some of that money too, because.
Okay, so did they help you in any other way?
Oh, they were very helpful in everything.
Yeah, in various ways.
In various ways.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they built the implementations and everything, the physical implementation. They built everything. They got it working. They marketed. They did everything, and then they also
because it's in their interest, obviously, to have a strong patent for theirs.
In the strong patents and everything, and they helped in providing information. We had there's maybe over 100 patents related to this and everything. So. So we litigated we did a lot of patents. Rockwell ended up with a long litigation, which ended up, and they were I litigated with multiple parties, but I've learned a lot about patents. There's all different kinds of patent litigations and lawsuits and licensing and thing. There's, some of it gets a bad name from, patent trolls that are really saying, you happen to have done this thing, which I have a patent on. Maybe you didn't know. They probably didn't know, and they probably could have made other choices that didn't do it. But now they're going to get hit up for this. I'll ransom for it. On this patent, there's no way to do, as far as I know, and still don't know, any way to get up to the higher speed without actually doing this method. So it's not just a patent on the thing you happen to do. It's a patent on the enabling technology, the technology that enables us. In Rockwell's case in particular, not only was it an infringement of the patent, but they got the idea from, I'm the one that told them how to do it, right? So it was, it's very direct, like they stole this from me. So we litigated that, eventually came to a settlement, a very significant settlement with them that ended up they ended up paying much more than they expected to pay.
Did they admit anything?
Not really, no. It went quite far in the lawsuit. It went through, like they have these things called the Markman hearing, which is really interpreting all the claims of the patents and everything, and we got through that. And
what a nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that because, this is like great creative people like you come up with these great ideas and then
spend a lot of time in litigation.
Yeah, that's the thanks you get.
Yep.
So, it's like, God, it's really bad.
It was interesting, they sort of shot themselves in the foot. First of all, you know, what they should have done, obviously, is negotiate fairly and everything. They would have got a lot cheaper than they ended up paying. They ended up, and I see this very often because I've involved in a lot of small companies, a lot of other ventures and everything. Generally, a large company that ignores a patent does better in the end. They don't have to. They end up not paying as much for forgiveness as they would have to get permission. So it becomes a business practice to walk over IP and assume that you can fix it later.
Kind of a come and get us attitude.
Yeah, come and get us. And ultimately it ends up, you know, that they don't pay as much as they would have in the first place.
Yeah.
So.
And it really is such a David and Goliath, you know, story with the inventor. And
right.
Yeah.
In this case, but even in the case where it's other companies, they still do the same thing. In this case, they ended up paying more than they would have, which made me happy. Partially because they were over-optimistic about things they were going to do in the future. So they ended up settling based on a spin-off company that was going to do something and giving me shares, but then they didn't actually do that, and the penalties for not having done it were much higher than anything that they would have wanted to pay. And then we litigated against. We basically went around the industry and licensed everybody else that was doing it, which was a lot of players. You know, maybe.
Was anyone making the? Was this reduced to a chip?
Yes.
At some point?
Yeah. So there was chips. There was people making the chips. There was people making the products. There was people making the upstream end. The you know, basically for the servers ends, and there was improvements, and everybody was involved in it. So the biggies, you know, like Texas Instrument, Intel. You know, we had litigation with all of them, with everybody. Well, we had licensing negotiations. Some of the companies we licensed were straight off. Others ended up in litigation.
What was the role? You know, I'm just mentally walking the aisles at Fry's 25 years ago, and thinking, well, U.S. robotics was always right number one.
Yeah.
Then I think was Rockwell's called K-Flex?
Yeah, K56 Flex.
K-Flex, yeah.
And
then just a lot of no-name ones. And I'm curious, did
the no-name ones were all like, there were the few companies that were providing the chips.
Copies?
No, they were...
like a lot of the Asian, Chinese,
yeah, never went after anybody at the level of the box modem, except for the ones that were vertically integrated. It was always about the chips that were implementing it. Because otherwise, you're going after 1,000 different people to get licenses and everything. But there was only, you know, half a dozen.
Makers or something.
Yeah, 10 maybe that were doing the low-level stuff that was actually everybody else was using. So as long as you licensed the chips that all everybody's using, then the license would carry through to the box modem at the end.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, what's the next step? What happened next? We've still got a ways to go. So.
Yeah. So that was wow. Yeah.
Yeah, we're up to 1990.
Yeah, they were late 94. Well, by the time the modems launched, it was 96 and everything. Okay. So, yeah. In parallel, then, at the time the modems were, you know, all these lawsuits were happening and the modems were going. I started another company. So I was sort of co-located with another guy that was doing speech recognition stuff. So in an office building in Menlo Park. And we were talking about how it would be cool if you could use speech recognition to determine how people spoke different languages, how well they speak a language. So there was a big push, especially for the, you know, educational environment, like for students, foreign students that come to the U.S., they need to take an exam called the TOEFL, Test of English as a Foreign Language. And there's also a spoken language component to that, the test of spoken English. And those are the written test is fine. It's easy to automate and to put it on a computer and things like that. But a spoken language test required interviewers to sit down with somebody and listen to them or have a discussion with them and then give a subjective rating of this. So you know, at that time, speech recognition was okay. It's pretty good at figuring out what you said. If you made a lot of mistakes, but it was okay. But it was really good at it's kind of funny to say. It was pretty good at really good at recognizing things if it knew what you were saying already. So if I tell you to repeat a sentence, I already know what you're going to say. So speech recognition is really good at recognizing that. Okay, it seems like a dumb task.
Is
right?
that related to you limiting yourself to its its specific vocabulary?
All I'm going to do is make speech recognizer that recognizes Jack went up the hill.
Oh, okay.
And the only thing it's going to work on is Jack went up the hill. Okay, if you say anything else, it's going to get confused. Okay, but it's really good at Jack went up the hill. What that allows you to do is, first of all, to determine whether or not you really said Jack went up the hill. And then if you did, it allows you to pull out all of the details of how you said it exactly. How did you pronounce it? What was the timing? What was all these other variables? So all of those you can combine to assess how well do you speak English. Okay? The most important one being the first. If I give you a sentence in a language you know well, well, actually, let me back up. Say I give you a sentence in a language you don't know at all. If I say something in Chinese to you now and ask you to repeat it, you're gonna fail. Even if it's maybe one sound, if I say bonjour and ask you to repeat that, even if you didn't speak French, you could, okay, bonjour. I can remember the sounds.
Well, even a parrot can do that, right?
Exactly. So. You can remember the sounds, and that's related to short-term memory, right? You can short-term memory is neat. You can remember about 7 things. Yes. And there were 7 chunks, and they don't have to. They can be at any level, conceptual level. So if you don't understand the language, you're basically memorizing based on remembering 7 sounds to put together. Okay. If it gets longer than 7 sounds, then you can't repeat it. Okay.
And that's because they have no meaning for you, right?
They have no meaning. They're just
sounds.
Unrelated sounds.
They're not words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if you understand the language at a slightly higher level, you can understand the words. So now I could give you a 7-word sentence that you could repeat without having any understanding of it. Now, what happens if I give you a 14-word sentence? The way a human can reproduce that is they can remember the meaning of the sentence, and they can regenerate it using their knowledge of vocabulary and grammar, and a little bit of memory of exactly how you phrased it. So you can repeat word for word a 14-word sentence, even with your 7-word short-term memory.
Even with the same intonation, probably.
And with the same intonation, the same, was it a question, is it a statement, is it different things? So it turns out that's a very powerful way of determining if somebody speaks this language and how well they speak it. You just give them long sentences and ask them to repeat it. And the speech recognition now can do that perfectly because it knows what the sentence is, so it can tell if you've actually repeated it. And as a bonus, you can pull out intonation and timing and other things, so you can get other metrics. So you can build, basically what I'm saying is you can build a very good automated measurement of spoken language ability. So we launched this company called Ordinate to do that.
Ordinate is in the graph?
It is in the graph,
Yeah.
the abscissa and the ordinate. So it's the measurement axis. And it was very popular. I mean, we did language testing for many governments, for immigration testing,
So this actually works?
This actually works.
Yeah.
How
did you validate it?
So we put it into a 10-minute test format that you take over the phone. So you get an ID number, you get a piece of paper, you phone the thing, you follow the instructions you're given over the phone and on paper, and then automatically a minute later it's reporting the results of that test of your spoken language ability.
Something I got lost there. It's giving you got a piece of paper with instructions?
Yeah.
And it's telling you to just read?
Well, there's different components. The most valuable component is the repeat section. Say, in this section you'll just repeat whatever sentence you hear, and you say, it says bonjour or hello.
Okay, so they read this thing and then they have the test.
They have the
headphones.
There's other sections that are reading sections. Okay. So read aloud. So it says, okay, in this section you have these 10 statements. Can you read those aloud? So now you're just reading aloud. And other sections that are asking, do you hear, what is this? Right?
Wow, so they need to read as well, obviously.
So, but there's independent metrics too.
Yeah.
You can tell, this person speaks English very well. Their reading ability is not that good. Their intonation is off. Yeah, and it works very well. And the way you validate it, and the way we did validate it, is you have people take the test and also get human raters to measure them. So you have them interviewed, right? So we had many people that were interviewed. And what we found is that we could predict, so we take 3 human interviewers, independent, and then you can average their scoring, basically, of the person. The computer agreed with the average better than any of the individuals agreed with the average. Okay. So the individual raters had more variance away from the average than the computer did. The computer was predicting what the average humans would, how they would rate them, better than the humans could.
And the raters were professional.
Professional raters,
right?
interviewers. You know, there's a whole. The U.S. military has a whole group called the Defense Language Institute, which does a lot of.
Well, I used to have all their records. You remember those? Living in French.
Yeah, exactly. So they have expert reviewers from any language. So we started off. We did English, we did Spanish, we did Arabic, we did many different languages, and built these tests, and then they were used by for university sort of like TOEFL type things. They were used by immigration countries to do immigration, because a lot of countries require for giving landed immigrant status to be able to speak their native language at a certain proficiency level. High school.
Speak their native language.
I mean, speak the country, the national language.
English, yeah.
Yeah. Like Netherlands was one of the first one that did it. So then they had we did a Dutch test for them, so that would validate how well they speak Dutch before they became a Dutch citizen.
Is this business still in business?
So this business was acquired by Pearson Education.
Wow.
And then, so it's still in operation under that whole.
Another great success.
It ended up at Pearson. It was acquired by Harcourt, I think, originally, and then by Pearson. But
any special software tricks from your PhD or
this is all. This is all. I mean, speech recognition is all signal processing. It's all audio processing. It's all very related to the whole thing. There was also at Bell Labs at the time there was a speech recognition group as well that was doing a lot of the early speech recognition things. So it's Jared Bernstein, my partner in that, he had been an SRI in the speech recognition group before too, and as well as being a linguist and interested in language. So we built that company. We built the test. It was an automated test, and we sold a lot in Asia too for like high school testing and things like that. So that was very good, and then it got acquired in 2004, I think. From that, I mean, it still was a small company. It only grew, I think, by the time it was acquired, we were 35 people or something like that.
What an important niche, though.
Yeah, and still operating.
Amazing. Yeah. Did you have to involve people from the government to sort of get their seal of approval at any time, like the TOEFL people, or
TOEFL really, definitely. That's an educational testing service.
That's not the government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we worked a lot with ETS and with other testing organizations and everything, and then there was a lot of government funding. We worked with early reading too. We also could use the same kind of metrics to assess children of how well they can read, because you can just have them read aloud, listen to that, and then assess the reading ability. So we had some government funding from SBIRs and other funding agencies for doing that kind of thing. It was really interesting. So I was the CEO of that company, and Jared was the president, and then we did a lot of sort of work on that. Yeah, and it worked out really well. I mean, we had, again, we this time we had some, the previous thing, as I said, it was bootstrapped, and this one we had some investors, but it was all pretty small from the scale of venture capital investment right now. But it was a great return for everybody.
Right, and this would all run on a PC, right? No special hardware?
Yeah, well, in fact, you didn't even need a computer, because we had servers running, and then you could dial in from a cell phone or web. You could take it over the web, or you could also take it straight by phone, because a lot of places, especially in developing countries where they were interested, they didn't necessarily have, they had cell phones, but not necessarily web.
Necessarily, yeah.
And for doing voice, it actually works better to actually do it in a phone call, because you get enough quality, and you don't have all the issues of latency or the internet connection not working well. It's much more reliable. So even now, it's better to do it over a phone call than it is to do it over
a digital computer connection. Yeah. What's next? What happened next?
So Ordinate, so then we sold that, and then it's when I moved to Paris. Michelle and I moved to Paris. By then we had 2 kids, and so we wanted them to get more of the French environment. They'd been studying, going to school here in California at the French America School, which is then since it's called the International School of the Peninsula. So they got their French background, but thought it would be good for them to really be immersed in French for a while. So we moved to Paris. I got an apartment in the middle of Paris, and then they went to the local schools And I started doing photography there. So instead of doing, this company sold, done with that, done with the modem stuff. And so I signed up for a professional photography program in Paris, and then started doing sort of a whole range of photography, from photojournalism to fashion photography to fine art photography and things like that.
Oh, this is really amazing. Now, where did you come up with this side of your personality?
I'd always, liked photography, and I also like sort of the idea of art and science in some ways. And Michelle's also been a great influence on that, of really, having an artistic side and a science side. So it was really a way to explore that. I tried playing piano, and I'm terrible at it. I don't hold the tune very well, and tried the guitar and tried, different types of media and everything. But photography, it has both a technical aspect of, technically, how do you do it, and how do you make something work, and then artistic side of how do you do composition, what is the material and everything. So
were you using film or digital?
I was using some film. In the program I was doing some large format. And I actually, back while I was at Stanford PhD, I did a lot of photography too. I did a lot of darkroom photography. So that was sort of my side thing.
Okay, like a hobby.
A hobby thing, yeah. So I'd done a lot of view camera work. It was 8x10 negatives, black and white, and then processing, both color and digital, and black and white in the dark room.
Even you're doing color developing.
Color developing, yeah.
That's not that easy.
Of an 8x10 format.
That's challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then by the time
large format, sorry, that would be like 4x5.
8x10.
Oh, 8x10 in Paris.
In Paris. Well, at Stanford first.
Oh, it's
before,
Stanford.
And then by the time I got to Paris, I was pretty much switched over to digital.
You had a camera that was 8x10?
Yeah, the view cameras is just like you have a hood, and you have like a bellows and everything like that.
From the 1900s.
Yeah,
with the big.
Well, you don't need the big flash, but the same idea. And those are still very. I mean, for doing like studio photography, view cameras are very nice devices.
So that's what they're called, view cameras.
View cameras. So you basically, it's just a track, like a tripod track, and you mount two things. You mount on there a lens at some point, and the lens you can slide up and down, you can tilt it, you can position it, right? And then back here, you mount also on the rack a film holder. Okay? So here you have your film, and here you have your lens. And now, what you do is, in the film holder, you put a piece of ground glass instead of film. So now the image that's coming there gets projected onto the ground glass, and you can, and this is why you have a hood, so you can block off the other light, so you can look very closely at that ground glass image. So you can see exactly, it's like the photograph is sitting there, just like you would see on the back of a digital camera, except even more authentic, I would say. And it's super high resolution, much higher than any digital. So you can put a magnifying loupe on that ground glass and be looking at little details and everything. So you can set this up. And you have complete control. So for example, say you want to take a picture of a building. If you tilt the camera up like this, okay, to look up at the building, which is a normal camera, the lens and the back are fixed together, right? A normal camera or an iPhone or anything. Okay, so you tilt it up like this. So now you get all of the lines of the building are converging together. Okay, so you get perspective distortion. On the other hand, with this setup, you keep your film plane parallel to the building and move your lens up higher. So now all the images gets projected down, and there's no distortion of lines and anything. So you can do all these neat things. If you tilt the lens on the hand, you change the focal plane. So now, normally with a camera, what you focus on is a flat line there. I could take this lens here towards you, tilt it this way, and have your bottom of your shoes in focus and your eyes in focus at the same time, because I can line that thing up. So you have super flexibility, and so that's why people still use that. That's just the ultimate flexibility. You put that there, and instead of the piece of film, you can put a digital back on there.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, with side, a whole big side there.
Can you still get paper like from Ilford or?
You can, but it's harder.
Yeah.
And it's not worth it because the digital is now at the resolution.
I love what you're talking about with the lenses though, and being able to move the.
Right, that hasn't changed. You can still do that, and it's still very useful.
So when you were in Paris, tell me about this course. How long was it? And
it was for the year.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was doing a lot of studio work, learning,
What a
studio
perfect city to
lighting,
take photography. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
and then doing assignments. I mean, we do, like, for example, got assigned to do a fencing tournament. So with a 3-day fencing tournament, so going there and shooting the fencing tournament, shooting the participants, and shooting the whole scene to create a photojournalism view of that thing. And then we did, like, worked with some fashion designers to do, fashion shoots, worked with stylists, makeup, all the different other fields to try and set up things. Worked a lot with studio lighting.
What was the name of this program?
It's called SPEOS, SPEOS is the name of the SPEOS, which is related to some Greek mythology of Speos. Is like it's basically a camera obscura from Greek mythology.
Well,
Yeah.
this is really neat. So, and I guess you're getting into photography a bit because now you've done reasonably well with your inventions, and you can sort of take
Take
a
some
little
time off
breather now
and doing the art side.
explore some
Yep.
new things. Yeah.
So that worked out pretty well. I mean, we did some sort of, at that point, I came up with a series of photos which were semi-scientific versus art. What I realized is, a lot of, before when I was doing sort of the view camera with the film negatives and everything, it was sort of like, I'm trying to divide, I have sort of like an art side and be in art mode, which is no technology involved here, versus doing tech stuff, which is, all on the computer and computation and signal processing, things like that. Partway through that, I was realizing, well, what could be different about how I'm presenting photography is to use the technical side and to not try and separate the two, just do it all together. So, and that worked really well. I mean, it changed how I was doing photography and allowed me to create stuff that was actually interesting and different from what other people were doing. The main thing was a series called Looking Up, which was a whole set of photography that was focused on the sky, so centered in the sky, but was super wide angle, like 200-degree wide angle, so that you end up with photos that were the sky in the middle, but the perimeter is like what's normally going around in the world. And to do that, it was a lot of, it's actually multiple photographs, it's stitching everything together, and it's all doing it at super high resolution, like, gigapixel sort of resolution.
What tools? You Photoshop? Or?
No, it's all custom software and everything. It was also, so that was what I was saying. It was combining the things. So there wasn't any tools, at least then. There's better tools now, but to do this kind of stitching and reprojection and
this is 94.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah.
This is 2004.
Oh, 2004.
So it's a little bit more recent, but still, I mean, there wasn't the really good digital cameras. They were just
manipulating images of that size was not in the cards.
Right. So creating that thing, and so I was making these big. These were like 6 foot wide prints and everything. So
did you have a show?
Yes. So I had several shows. I have actually I still have a gallery that represents me here in San Francisco. That shows my work and everything.
I'm gonna have to look up your photos.
Minnesota Street Project. There's a gallery called Themes and Projects that I worked with for a long time. There's super good guys and everything in there.
Right now, what kind of photo projects are
now I've been doing
you?
More installation projects, more like larger scale installation art, primarily Burning Man. So things like we had an installation that we did as part of a project funded by Burning Man for one of the main square plazas called Pulse Field. And again, this is really going heavy on the technology side, technology art. So it was basically a center of the circle, which was like maybe 35, 40 feet in diameter, and put LiDAR units around the perimeter that would track everybody that's in the center space. So basically we could, from the computer thing, we could know up to maybe 50 people of where everybody is. So it's using laser, it's using time of flight laser to find where everybody is.
Nice.
The same LiDAR types of units that are used in all the self-driving cars. So we did that at about knee level, so we know where everybody's knees are, both knees individually. So tracking everybody, and then video projectors all around that are projecting onto the ground. So I'm projecting imagery on the ground that's based on where everybody is. And that gives a whole bunch of possibilities, and there are a lot of fun things built with this. For example, one thing is we just made a little soccer game. So there's just a ball sitting there, and you can walk up to it and you can kick it, the virtual ball, and you can kick it into the goals, and you can do things. Another one that's really nice and I really enjoy is we did a, and I say we because, work with, family members and other friends and everything, developing the applications and the whole thing and everything. We did a liquid simulation, so basically simulate water using these equations called Navier-Stokes equations, which calculate the differential equations of motion and everything. And then each person is basically, think of it as that their shoes are spurting out colored oil. And as you walk around, you're leaving a stream of oil.
Yeah, that's fun.
And you're also stirring the liquid, so you can stir it with your feet. So everybody else is influencing everyone else. So you get in there and you get the streaks of oil that are coming, different colors from different people, and you can get everybody to run around in a circle and create a little vortex in the middle of all this stuff. Where you can
do that here.
Yeah. So
I'm going to keep you in mind for our next exhibit. Yeah.
So we've done it. Actually, I did 2 shows
that's
of
cool.
this at the Exploratorium in San Francisco.
Oh yeah.
So we got the Exploratorium.
Wow.
Did,
How did that must have gone over very well?
Yeah, it went really well. So it was a little difficult. The floor surfaces, it's nice to have white, but depending on the situation, but and it's a lot of work to set up, but because you got lidars and you got cameras and and it's also sound and it's also got music. So the music is also algorithmically generated based on the positions of people, and it makes all the sound effects, but also then things like the Navier-Stokes. Depending on where people are, you get ambient noise that's changing, drones. And I worked with a friend, Marco Sands, who's an amazing musician that helped put together different soundscapes and everything, and then based on how people move.
Yeah.
So
that's quite the happening, as they used to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just skipping ahead a little bit to the next venture in your life. What was that?
So then after Paris, we continued sort of our French immersion and moved back to Montreal for a couple of years. And while there, that was I started to get more interested in the bio side. As I mentioned early on, I was doing cochlear implants, so it was bio from sort of a bioengineering perspective. But I'd done the internet things, the modem stuff, and a few other projects I haven't mentioned, and then the speech recognition. But I was sort of feeling that it was getting less interesting, sort of the internet, computer, EE side of things. That basically everything has been invented, and we're just doing improvements and things like that. And it's kind of and then a lot of internet startups that are just this really good marketing machines. So what I'm thinking is, bio, on the other hand, is 1% of the things are discovered. And also, there was a human genome project that just happened, which was creating sort of a more rational, I would say, infrastructure for doing biology. Like when I was a grad student originally, biology was a lot of unrelated facts that you were sort of memorizing and sort of remembering that this goes here. And
the Krebs cycle.
The Krebs cycle, exactly. The chemistry,
well, molecular biology changed all that, right?
Molecular biology changed it completely. So all of a sudden now you had this very quantitative, formal framework under which to build the knowledge. So now these unconnected pieces of knowledge became tied to the genes, they became tied to the pathways and everything within those genes.
And that happened in our lifetime. I mean,
that happened
even in the last 30 years.
Exactly. That happened in that period from, mostly in the 90s and early 2000s. So I was looking at that and saying, well, this is really cool. This is maybe I could apply some of the signal processing and ideas here into the bio side. So my wife's brother, Philippe, he had a friend, Michel Tremblay, that was the director of McGill's Cancer Research Institute. So he put me in contact with him. I went and talked to Michel Tremblay, and he was like enthusiastic. He said, "Oh, that's great. I know you don't know anything about molecular biology." He says, "Why don't you come into my lab and I'll have somebody teach you how to do the lab stuff, and you can take some classes at McGill." And so that's what I did. I came back to school. I'd taken organic chemistry a long time ago. I took it again. Took molecular biology classes. Took all those. And meanwhile, I was going into his lab, and the research assistant, and taught me how to pipette and taught me how to run some experiments and things. And then his lab was really focused on a phosphatase, PTP1B, which is it's basically a molecule that's common
and it cleaves phosphate from
exactly.
something.
Yep.
Right.
And it's implicated, overactivity of it's implicated in metastasis of cancer. It's also implicated in diabetes. It's implicated in many, many different things, incorrect function or overexpression. So they were on the hunt for a molecule that would inhibit this phosphatase as a potential drug candidate. I was looking at some other sort of, more rational biology. There was this thing called aptamers. These are little sequences of nucleic acid, like DNA or RNA, that bind to things, that actually stick to things. And what's cool about them is that the way you find them is by doing evolution. You actually get a big pot of a lot of random ones, and then you sort of pull out the ones that stick to what you're interested in. You amplify those again. You make more copies of the ones, and you let them mutate a little bit. And then you do the experiment again. You pull out the sticky ones, and you do this over multiple rounds, and eventually you end up with a pot of these molecules that are really sticky to the thing you want them to be.
Right. Is it a DNA synthesizer you're talking about?
You're using DNA synthesis during the process, but the actual thing is it's called CLEX, but it's a technique that was invented actually in 1990 or so. But it just allows you to start with random molecules, and effectively you're doing evolution in a test tube. You're saying the ones that stick to what I want, I'm going to call them more fit and keep them and kill off the other ones.
And what is this thing that you've...
so the thing we want...
What is the sticky thing?
The thing we want to stick to is this phosphatase. Okay, so we're putting in the phosphatase. It's basically, think of the pot, you put the phosphatase in, you keep all the molecules that stuck to it, throw away the other ones, then remove those molecules, use the technique polymer chain reaction, PCR, to amplify those, to make more of them. Then you do the experiment again and get the sticky ones. Meanwhile, you also can do an experiment where things that stick to other stuff that might be there are thrown away. So there's like positive and negative. I'll give you a lot of details. But the ultimate goal is you have stuff that's really sticky to the PTP1B. And so I worked on that after sort of the training period, got a grant from the Canadian government to do this research. And we found a really sticky molecule to it. And not only that, it actually inhibited the activity. So you could get something that sticks to it but doesn't make any difference to how it operates. But better is getting something that actually inhibits it. And that got carried forward into testing in mice and everything, and still has potential to be a cancer therapy. I would say potential, but it's also, the problem is nucleic acid, RNA, it's really hard to get into the body at the right place, which is a completely independent problem of getting the molecule to stick to it. And that's really the limiting factor in using these for treatment, these RNA molecules. But though that's a big resurgence now because of COVID and everything.
So really interesting that you just made a complete gestalt switch into biology. What prompted that? Just personal interest? Or?
Personal interest, and this general observation that there was a lot of opportunity, green fields, I guess.
That's right. You mentioned
to be
engineering was done. It was time to move on.
And by then I've been sort of seeing myself. I'd done the thing with that link, which was really making a product, a physical product. And after that, I was thinking, okay, I've done I don't want to do physical products. Conceptual products are better. Did Ordinate, which was really software product, right? I did the modem, which was really completely a invention, and there was no physical. Like I said, I never made a product. Didn't ever actually ever sell anything other than the actual licensing. And I thought, that's really where I want to be, is in the invention field. I don't want to have to build things. I don't have to sell things. I don't have to market things. I just want to make ideas that then can be
methods and processes.
Methods and processes that can be used by other people to do what they want to do. Right. So then I was thinking, well, you know, a lot of that's maybe it's harder to find those things on the EE side because there's a lot of people doing that, but on the bio side, it was a lot more potential.
I've often thought if I was, you know, starting life again, I would go into medicine actually, because it's just infinitely. There's no saturation point.
Right.
And then whereas engineering, it seems, you know, like you say, it's sort of. I don't want to say it's finite because no field is finite. There's always new things.
There's always new things, but there's a lot more to discover on the bio side.
But biology and medicine are so. We're just getting started,
right.
Which is. It feels like we're in the almost like the galvanic stage of medicine, right? Where we're still making batteries out of zinc plates and.
Yep. No, it's true. And there's a lot of analogies between, and that's actually, you know, I'll even say even more specifically, bioengineering is really interesting, because then you're taking the sort of the engineering aspect and applying it to biology, and that can have output that is therapeutic, like for human medicine, but it also has a lot of other potential. It's like, how do you harness biology to do things? And that can be making chemicals, that can be doing bioremediation, that could be doing, you know, carbon capture, that could be doing all sorts of things that obviously therapeutics are a big part of it, or diagnostics, but all sorts of other things too. And getting that understanding of biology is really important. I think it's a blossoming industry. You know, you see Stanford's bioengineering department, it's growing. Everybody's got bioengineering departments now, and they didn't have those, 20 years ago. They didn't exist. On the side of medicine, I mean, you know, that's sort of one specific side of it, but that's also, I mean, blossoming, and there's so much more knowledge there.
So much of medicine, or at least public health, I should be more specific, is dependent on really simple, basic things that we've known about for 50 or 100 years.
Right.
You know, it's just getting the implement, like poliovirus or
viruses,
and yellow fever, all of those things.
And but there's a lot of other things.
A lot of human suffering that happens with 10 cents worth of an antibiotic or something.
Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, this is very cool, and part of the designer medicine thing I think you're getting at too, right? Which is that would be the next logical step, which is to understand the patient's genome and then tailor therapies.
To understand the genome, to tailor them, and to tailor, biological systems. I mean, you could even imagine things like from bioengineering side, you know, say you could engineer a bacteria that can identify cancer cells. Okay, and then you can just put that bacteria into your bloodstream, and it'll go around and attack cancer cells, right? So it's a biological
because
method.
Right now all we're doing is shutting down cells that multiply quickly.
Right. That uptake toxic chemicals at a higher rate than other cells uptake the same toxic chemicals. So, not the greatest.
Another one would be another application could be like designer antibiotics, because the antibiotics do quite a number on your gut flora for a lot of people. I mean, the dysbiosis that results is actually quite serious for a lot of people. They're never the same after just one course of antibiotics.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like getting tailored antibiotics that don't wipe out the good ones, the good microbes.
Right. Yeah, and I actually was involved a lot with a company called Epibiome a few years back that was doing bacteriophages. So basically, there's a lot of viruses that attack bacteria. So you can actually design or find or evolve viruses that attack particular. Exactly what you're saying. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, phages are cool. They're little.
Yeah.
They're little, the way they look. Yeah. So I know we've got maybe another, 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then so why don't we move along and go? At some point, you started Shazam. So I'm not sure.
That was in the middle there. That was probably. I maybe even jumped over.
Let's dig into that because that's really important.
Yeah. So I think that was 2000, 2001. Or maybe 99. No, I didn't. I'm not a founder of Shazam.
Or an investor, perhaps.
An investor. So what happened was there was two students, MBA students from Berkeley, that had the idea of they're basically looking for a company to start. What was the idea? And they sort of came up with different ideas of how to what would be an interesting product. and they brainstormed and said, well, it would be really cool if we could do music recognition. That would be a really cool app if you could phone a number on your phone or put a code, and then your phone would tell you what music is playing. So they had that idea. They came to, then they said, well, we're not doing any engineering. Well, how do we do this, right? So they came, and this is classic, but in this case it really worked well. So Philip Engelbrecht and Chris Barton were the two there, and they had this idea, and then they talked to people, different universities and things. And they talked to a prof here at Stanford, Julius, and he pointed them to another guy that was a former student that done his PhD with him, and it was really brilliant engineer. So they came and talked to him, and he thought about it and said, oh yeah, I think I know how to do that. So he became the third co-founder. And meanwhile, Julius said, oh, but you should also talk to Brent, because he's kind of interested in this kind of signal processing stuff, and maybe he could give you some advice about how to do patents and legal stuff and everything, since it had all the, the IP stuff. So they got Avery on board, and then they contacted me, and then we had lunch in Menlo Park, and they explained what they're doing. I said, oh, that's super cool, and here's the attorneys you should talk to, and here's how you should do the patent things, and that's really cool. Can I give you some money to invest in this? And so they hadn't had any investment. So that next day I wrote them a check, and that was their first their funding for that company. And then after that, they went around and they built up the idea more. They built their pitch deck, and they approached VCs, and they got VC funded, and then they built a big, and then I invested in the subsequent rounds as well of that. And then I was on the board for most of the time of the life of Shazam. I was one of the board members.
Can you tell us what's going on technically with Shazam? how it works?
It's pretty interesting. It's just basically finding a signature at each little time frame. So it's basically reducing the sound that it hears in this time frame into a small, compact signature. Okay, and then it's looking up in a database of all the signatures of all the recorded music it's seen, and finding a match against that. I mean, it's more complicated than that, because there's little timing differences. There's when you do the signatures, it's how you do the signatures. So Avery came up with a lot of great ideas in there, and they patented those ideas, and they protected it quite well. And they built the system. They started in the UK, interestingly. So they were here, but they basically started the company in London. And the primary reason was this is pre-iPhone. You have to think this is pre-PDA. So, and clearly, you'd want to be able to do this with your phone. What there was in the UK and other parts of Europe is there was the idea of getting short codes to send SMS messages. So you get short codes to say, here's a 4-digit, a pound 416. I could be the provider for pound 416. And so it's a short call. And you could make the call and hold up your phone as it's on a regular phone call. Yeah. And then it would text you back by SMS the identification.
Wow. So you dial pound 416
and then hold your phone for 10 seconds.
And that calls their server.
That calls their server. It listens.
Listen for 10 seconds.
And then it sends back a text message with the identification of the song.
Cool.
Right?
Wow.
So you could do that in the US too. There wasn't as short codes weren't as popular, so you'd have to dial a full phone number, but you could have your speed dial. Okay. But more importantly was the UK had a facility for charging people, the receiver, for text messages. So the business model said it costs you 25 cents to do this. So you can do this, and every time when it sent you the text message, it billed you 25 cents. And even better, it was the phone company that you get that bill on your phone bill, and then the phone company remitted it back to Shazam.
Oh, okay.
So
they're collecting your money for you.
They're collecting the money for you. You don't have to bill. You have automatic there, and you couldn't do that in the U.S. U.S. has no facility for chargeback SMS. So they did it in UK, and it was great, and it worked. It was growing, and then in 2004, the iPhone launched, and they became one of the first. They immediately said, "Well, this is obviously what we need to do." They launched on the App Store. They were one of the very early apps. It was like the #1 app on the App Store, and it worked. Even better. Now it's good to, and they improved. So they did a lot of the front end processing on the iPhone itself, and.
What I like about Shazam is that for me, embodies Arthur C. Clarke's saying about any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yep.
The fact you can just hold it and it tells you what song. And that just also appeals to a really basic human sort of stress point, like, what is that song?
Yep, no, it's a really nice technology. Really, people
fantastic.
understand it really well.
Really clever. It could be quite educational too, like
yep.
learning classical music or whatever.
Yeah, it even will. It's interesting. It's not identifying the song; it's identifying the recording that's playing.
Oh, the actual performance.
So if it's the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, when you get the identification, it'll tell you that was the the Dallas Philharmonic, the 1982 recording of that.
That's amazing. Do you know how small time slices they take? Is that proprietary maybe?
Well, it might have been, but I'm not sure.
Interesting.
And it's the technology evolved so much.
Because it sounds like, certain lawyers who are maybe, might view like, isn't this a quick way to identify plagiarism with music? Like, hey,
absolutely.
These 5 songs all start with exactly the same 5 sequence of
notes.
Or,
Okay.
I'm not that it would
for that it doesn't actually work. So it won't work for humming, for doing things. It's because it's not actually looking at any perceptual identity. Like I said, it knows what recording it is. Okay, if you played the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, another orchestra, but it doesn't have that recording in its database, it won't know that that's the Fifth Symphony.
Ah, okay.
It knows it's actually a bit per bit match up to that
It's
recording.
not listening to the music really in the way a human would, by
Correct.
listening to the notes.
It's listening to the actual
chopping
bits.
it up into a million pieces per second.
And it is heavily used by the recording industry for rights management. For like, is the radio playing this copyrighted version, and do we collect royalties from them, or is this TV show doing this? So people use this technology. There's all sorts of companies that use this technology for all of the rights management. And then obviously Apple eventually acquired Shazam, and now it's part of.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, so it was acquired.
What year was that? Any idea?
4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Not that long ago. So yeah, 4 years ago maybe, or 5. So they acquired it, and it's now part of the iPhone, and it's on the main page of, like the control panel of the iPhone now. And also Siri automatically does it too. Yeah. So you can just tell Siri, what's the name of that song?
Oh, I see.
So
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is Shazam's? What are their plans for the future? Or are they just sort of?
Well, they're gone. I mean, they don't exist anymore. They're acquired by Apple. They're Apple. They're Apple.
Yeah.
I mean,
so they're kind of
recognition.
Interestingly,
another.
Yeah.
This is funny, but it came out so one of the other people at Ordnet that I worked with, Ogi Todek, after left Ordnet, he used that speech recognition sort of engines to listen to songs to figure out the lyrics. So basically, the problem is you have a song that's playing. You also have somewhere on the internet or somewhere you have the lyrics, but they're not lined up to each other. Yeah. So he created a company called Toonsy, which lined those two things up. Then Toonsy was acquired by Shazam, and then Apple acquired Shazam. So if you notice, there's a lot of Apple stuff now that has lyrics identification. It seems like it's all coming from that whole history of that path of
wow.
that.
So your DNA is like really in there.
I'm not my person, but Ogie's was there. But
that's amazing.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. So then, let's see. Let's fast forward a little bit. Yeah. I was at McGill. We came back to California. I started working at Stanford, sort of in the same kind of role.
But in biology.
In
this
biology
time,
now.
Right? Yeah.
Because previously, I was also being a consulting professor at Stanford for a while too, in electrical engineering and digital signal processing. But then we came back, I was more on the bio side. So I connected up with Drew Endy and Christina Smolke, which husband and wife, they both have labs in bioengineering. And the great people, they invited me to come into their labs to continue sort of work on aptamers, these pieces of RNA and everything. So I've been doing that now for a long time.
So you're still in grad school?
Still in grad school. Still been doing that.
That's great. What a wonderful life.
Yeah,
really
and it's been doing experiments there. And so there I'm actually doing a lot of the lab work, the physical lab work, pipettes and everything, as well as doing, a lot of it is high throughput sequencing, like using DNA sequencing to infer things. And I also have robots to do robotic things. But so there's a lot of different technologies involved, but it's exciting. And then
Do you use those plates, the DNA plates?
yeah.
Like,
Use
what were they?
microplates and
The company that was out that made them all. Can't remember. First company to make those.
oh yeah, I don't
Do you
know actually
remember?
maybe.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
They're Affymetrix.
Oh, Affymetrix, yes,
Yeah.
yes, for the DNA arrays, so those arrays that have probes on them that you can flow something over and they stick to them. Yeah, that kind of technology is prevalent now. I mean, the big push is always now high throughput. It's like, how do you scale things? And sequencing, DNA sequencing is really an amazing tool for doing that, because if you can take an experiment that you would normally do with lab tools to measure on a plate reader or do things, if you can change the output so that it changes the sequence of something, then you can mix millions of experiments together, and the DNA sequencer can do at scales, hundreds of millions, billions of reads of data that can come back and then tell you the results of the experiments. So all of a sudden you can multiplex something at a million scale and put together experiments in ways that are amazing. And maybe that brings up to the last stage of this whole story, which is last year my son also, Raphael, he started a company based on his PhD work. So he came to Stanford to do his PhD. He worked in structural biology with machine learning, and he got a really nice publication in Science. It was in the cover of Science last year.
Oh, I'm going to look that up.
Yeah.
I subscribe. What's his last
Same,
name?
yeah.
Okay.
Raphael Townshend.
Raphael. Okay, good.
And and we're super proud of him and his sister.
That's
They're both like
what a crowning achievement that is.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was doing structural biology and machine learning, and she was doing mechanical engineering, and also at Stanford too, and also art, and she's an amazing artist. So, and she's got a great art career. But Raphael, bringing that up here in my story, because Raphael started a company last year based on his PhD work to do RNA, machine learning on RNA, to predict, using machine learning to predict structure of RNA molecules for drug development and everything.
Do they use cryo-EM at all?
They do use cryo-EM. Yeah, they use cryo-EM data right now. They're actually not doing cryo-EM in-house, but they're using...
There's a technology that's changing everything.
Yeah. And Raphael, during his PhD, he worked with...
Those are amazing machines. I saw one the other week.
Oh, yeah?
Oh,
At
they're huge.
Slack? Yeah, so he did some work at Slack too, on the cryo-EM stuff, but mostly other people who's in the cryo-EM side of things.
It's a lot of preparation, I think.
It's very... somebody in
but
the
easier
group,
than crystallography, apparently.
Yeah, better.
Because it's hard to get proteins to crystallize.
Yeah. No, definitely the technology is evolving a lot. So he's sort of using that and other techniques to figure out that. And so I'm ending up doing a lot of the lab work there now. So I've been sort of transitioning to help him out. And
so you're helping your son?
Yeah. So,
that's lovely.
Yeah. So I would say I'm working for him, or I could say
you're working for him. That's great.
Or maybe I should say I'm working for somebody that works for him.
Yeah. Oh, that's really nice.
So that's fun, and we get to drive up in the morning to Oyster Point to do that. And
is that, what does he do out at Oyster Point? Sorry.
So started the company there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And it's out of one J-Labs accelerator. So it's like, building it up there. Right. So, and his sister is helping out. They're doing a lot of doing design. Oh, I should have worn my logo shirt.
You got a logo shirt. That's great. Yeah. Well, is there anything you would like to say just in finishing that I didn't ask about?
I think we covered a lot. It's taken a while here, huh?
Yeah. What a great life.
It's been interesting to discuss it, because a lot of things I hadn't thought about in many years, like you brought back and everything, kind of from the oil deliveries
yes.
up to
I was saying, look at the generational differences from just your generation and your sons, and they're just like incredible high achievers. Like, that's great. It's nice to see the value of education. It just shows you that it changes lives.
Yeah. And exposure to I would have to say that, moving away from here and going to Paris and going to Montreal and things really creates especially for the kids, an environment that's really...
By the way, can you believe the lunches that kids get in France?
Oh. That was exactly Camille.
Isn't that
the first day from home from elementary school? She's saying, "Oh, this is so good." So lunch served by the school, the public elementary school, not a private school or anything.
Right.
So it was like, a salad to start, and then a steak with asparagus, and then a cheese course, and then dessert.
It's amazing. Yeah, my niece went there for 5 years, and I was like, and then you compare it to what kids here get, right? Like
Yeah.
fish sticks and French fries or
Yep.
something, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh. So that was very heartening when I saw France treating their kids well. They've got their priorities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess your kids are bilingual too, right?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Especially Camille. She's like, she criticizes corrects my French very often, French pronunciation, since mine is still very English influenced. So.
Well, thank you so much, Brent. This has been lovely, and I really appreciate you coming in today. We've learned a lot of new things, and
Thank
this
you.
will be very useful to people to read through what you've said today. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks. It's been a great opportunity to be here, and thanks for all the work here at the museum too. This is an amazing place.
No, thank you.
Yeah.